Hello friends, this is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Fem Naruko traveled through time with Kushina and Hinata? Episode 1. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's start. When the Sage of Sixth Paths died, there was very little that either Kurama or any of the other tailed beasts could do. Though his ultimate wish for peace was yet to be released, he was content to leave his dream in the hands of the generations to follow. Though they wanted to believe in his words, in his assurance that someone will come and lead them on the right path, the years had not been kind to many of the tailed beasts, and as the resentment over their treatment continued to fester, so did the little hope in which remained began to diminish. That was until Naruto Uzumaki decided it wasn't enough to just save the world, he needed to save them too. At least I'll get to see everyone again, the child who he'd witnessed grow into the man he had come to know and respect said, dying the same way he'd lived most of his life, with a grin on his face and fighting in the name of everything he held dear. And just like the idiot he was, rather than fight the darkness threatening to overcome him, he instead slowly allowed his eyes to close. Naruto. Frowning, Naruto snapped his eyes open. In place of the decimated battlefield that surrounded him only moments before, he had opened his eyes to find himself surrounded by 9 familiar faces. Realizing where he was, he allowed his gaze to drift over each and every one of the tailed beasts before him. Shukaku. Matabi. Isobu, Son Goku, Kokuo, Seiken, Chome, Gyuki, Kurama. They were all there. What's going on? He found himself asking. We now understand what the Sage of the Six Paths meant when he told us we will come to understand what true power is. Kurama spoke on behalf of them all. For once there was no bickering. No taunts. Nothing but a quiet agreement shared by all 9. You have shown us this. Both through your words and actions you have made us regain the hope we thought was forever lost. There is no question in our minds of who you are. You are the child of prophecy we have been waiting for. Hey, Naruto laughed, running a hand through the mess of his spiky golden hair. An action so reminiscent of his younger self that Kurama couldn't help but think of the obnoxious 12-year-old that would use to shout to anyone who would hear of it how he was going to become the Hokage and protect his precious people. Back then no one would have imagined it possible. Even he, in all his infinite wisdom, did not believe the pathetic human serving as his container would ever amount to much. Yet like the mere mortals he often scoffed at, he had also been proven wrong. Time and time again they had all been proven wrong, because even when nobody believed in him, Naruto had always believed in himself, and somehow through strength of will alone he was able to make others believe. Without even knowing it, Naruto had begun to pave the way for the peace that the Sage of the Six Paths could only dream of. How are you all here? Naruto questioned. The touch of regret and sadness in his eyes reaffirms for them all what they already knew, and that was that their faith in him had not been misplaced. I thought that when the Jubi was destroyed you were all destroyed along with it. Had the Jubi been completed you wouldn't have been able to stop us. The only way to get rid of us would have been to seal the 10 tails within another vessel, Matabi, the Nibi, politely explained. Since that was not the case, as it had not yet achieved its final form, you were able to succeed in destroying the body and in turn freeing us once more. Though at those words Naruto visibly brightened, his expression once more became grim as his gaze fell upon Gyuki. Unable to meet his eyes he turned away, the memory of Kurabi's death still fresh in his mind. As for the reason we are all able to appear before you is because at one point or another we all gave you some of our chakra, and that chakra has remained with you, Matabi continued to explain. Like my parents, Naruto whispered with a sad smile. Somewhat, Kurama agreed. So why are you all here? Why now? We offer you a chance, Naruto, he answered in a booming voice. A chance to live the life you were meant to. To save those you weren't able to in this time. To go back and rewrite your own legend. At that Naruto frowned, not quite sure what this was all supposed to mean. Alone we are nothing but a chakra, a force capable of unparalleled destruction, Kurama informed the blonde. But together we are more. Together we hold within us the power equal to that of a god, and together we have the power to send you back. Though he was still far from being the sharpest kunai in the box, it did not take a genius to realize what Kurama was speaking of, what it was they were offering him. In spite of everything he has seen, everything he has witnessed, Naruto couldn't quite wrap his head around it. What they were offering should be impossible. Why not just revive me then? Naruto found himself asking. Why not just allow me to return to this time? Even as the words left his mouth, Kurama knew how much the thought pained his vessel. While the allied forces managed to destroy the Jubi and defeat both Tobi and Madara, it was not without its losses. Save for Naruto himself, every last one of the Konoha 12 had perished. Even Kakashi and Guy were gone. Despite the fact Konohagakure still stood, he knew it wouldn't be the same for the team before him. Not without them. Not without his friends, all his precious people. A stronger man would go back, would return to pick up the pieces and help rebuild. But for once in his life it seemed Naruto did not want to be the stronger man. If that is your wish, then it is within our every power to do so, Kurama conceded. But think about what we are offering you, Naruto. We are offering you the chance to be reborn, to know your parents and grow up with the love and support denied to you in this life. You can save them all. You can make sure what happened today will never happen ever. My parents, Naruto repeated with more than a hint of longing. With renewed hope in his eyes he added, everyone. Do not think of it as abandoning your remaining comrades, Naruto, Matabi assured him. Think of it as the chance to build a better future. Not only for yourself but for everybody you cared about. At those words the possibilities raced through Naruto's mind. Given the chance, there was so much he could do, so many people he could save. Only this time he could do it with both his parents by his side. The thought alone brought a lump to his throat. It was almost too much to hope for, too much to bear. Had he been given such an offer before the Fourth Shinobi World War, Naruto would have immediately dismissed it as nothing more than a malicious trick. Not now. Not when he trusted Kurama with his life. With determined eyes he lifted his head and asked, "What do you need me to do?" In reply Kurama grinned. "Just one thing. You need to make a choice." "Didn't I just do that?" Naruto asked in confusion. "You have one more choice to make," Kurama informed him with a touch of impatience. "You can go back to the day you were born, or you can go back further. We can take you back before Obito turns into Tobi, before Nagato turns into Pain." "What do you mean?" 10 years before you were born your mother had been pregnant once before," replied Kurama to his great shock. "Your parents were young, and since it was neither expected nor planned, your mother did not have any reason to think she was with child at the time." He paused, allowing a moment for Naruto to process the words before continuing. "There was a mission. Your mother was hurt. And since I did not care for anything other than my own survival, I did only what was necessary to ensure she lived. Because of that, the child did not survive." At that Naruto felt his breath catch at the revelation. Though the thought of having to wait so long to see them all again, to see Sakura-chan and every one of the friends he practically grew up with, pained him, this wasn't something he could just turn down. So he thought about it. About the possibilities of being born before Madara managed to get his hands on Obito. He thought about the Obito that existed before he manipulated him into the twisted shell he would become. Thought about the Obito who taught Kakashi the principles he would follow to his dying day. Tobi may not deserve nor want a second chance, but the boy he once was certainly did. Maybe if he could save Obito, save Rin, things would be different this time. Could he prevent Nagato from ever having to lose himself to pain? Would he be able to save Itachi from ever having to lose all those he loved? Could he save the Uchiha clan from themselves? The list went on. The thought of his friends living long enough to get the chance to get married and even have kids of their own was not something he could easily let go of. Not when nearly every one of them died for him, died to just give him a chance to end this senseless war. When it came down to it, it was a small sacrifice on his part, to not be able to grow up alongside them if it only meant they all lived. Take me back, he found himself saying. Taking comfort in the fact that although he would not grow up with them, it did not mean he would not be a part of their lives. When Kurama demanded, the decision made by Naruto resolved, to before my birth. At that Kurama grinned, done. One by one each of the Biju began to vibrate with chakra, expanding, widening, merging together, until there was nothing but one, until they were surrounded only by a single concentration of pure chakra. A perfect mix of all 9 combined. So similar to the chakra emitted by the Jubi but different, less malevolent but no less strong. Like a wave it poured over him. As the world began to disappear around him, Naruto faintly heard a loud booming laugh. "What did you do?" he heard one of the others ask. "There may be one tiny detail I forgot to inform him of." Kurama, his hazy mind supplied. "Just think of it as a little payback for all the years I had to deal with his constant yelling and idiocy." Then there was nothing, only darkness. When he first discovered he was going to be a father, Minato Namikaze wasn't quite sure how to react. To go from nearly losing the woman he loved to finding out she was pregnant with their child was not exactly the normal way to go about things. Then again, it shouldn't really surprise him. Because when it came down to it, there was nothing about Kushina that could ever be considered anywhere near normal. Besides being one of the last surviving members of the Uzumaki clan, she was just about the most unorthodox kunoichi he has ever known. To see her in battle was as mesmerizing as it was frightening. In the face of her enemies she was unstoppable, an unforgiving force all on her own. To the point he was almost certain there was nothing that could harm her, nothing that could ever bring her down. So when it happened, when he returned from a mission and was waylaid with the news she had been brought in a week before, bloodied and barely breathing and still yet to regain consciousness, he felt as if his world was about to shatter. Having known her since the academy, it was a shock to discover that her injuries had not been healed, to find that an operation had been necessary. With his knowledge of the Kyuubi and what it was capable of, Minato couldn't help but worry. In all the time he has known her, Kushina couldn't even suffer a small cut without it being healed almost instantly. There was no way she would be allowed to veer so close to death. Not without the timely interference of the tailed beast she contained. From her interactions with the beast, it was clear that Kyuubi was far too concerned with its own survival to allow something like this to happen, to allow its existence to be compromised in such a way. Worried by what it might mean, Minato had immediately checked the seal. As soon as he did, it was to find the Kyuubi's chakra being concentrated in one place, well away from any of her visible injuries. Instead, he could feel it vibrating around her abdomen. Not exactly sure what to make of it, but suddenly hit with the fear of a worst injury possibly going undetected, he immediately alerted the doctors to the anomaly. To say that the answer he received was not what he was expecting would be a gross understatement. It seemed that rather than completely heal Kushina's injuries, the Kyuubi had instead directed most of its power towards healing something else entirely, their unborn child. It was something he did not understand. At least not until Kushina awoke and was able to explain that the seal would be at its weakest during childbirth, that there was a possibility the Kyuubi could escape its containment if she was to proceed with the pregnancy. In spite of the gravity of the situation, of the fact it was the result of the Kyuubi's manipulations, when he asked her what it was she wanted to do and he was greeted with a simple but happy, "I'm going to be a mom databane," Minato set all worry aside and simply smiled. As shinobis, there was no certainty in life. Kushina's close call had shown him exactly how fragile their existence was. Not wanting to waste another moment, Minato immediately proposed. While he had to convince her he was not only doing so just because of her pregnancy, in the end Kushina happily agreed. With only the Hokage and a few close friends in attendance, they married in a quiet ceremony 2 months later. While he never imagined being married, let alone a father at barely 18, it was always Kushina he dreamed of by his side. Kushina dreamed of marrying, of having a child with. Though in those dreams they were always a little older, he was happy. As scared as he was, he wanted this. A soft grunt suddenly brought him out of his musings. Turning to the source, Minato couldn't help but notice the strain on his sensei's face as he stood over Kushina, hands held out over her stomach as she screamed in pain. As if sensing his gaze, Jiraiya assured with a confident grin, "Don't worry kid, I've got this." Although he was a seal master in his own right, Minato decided to err on the side of caution by having the legendary Sannin present for the birth. In light of what happened all those months ago, he was determined to take every precaution necessary. Ever since the news of Kushina's pregnancy broke, they have been almost obsessively planning for Naruto's birth. "Naruto, please come out quickly," he found himself yelling as Kushina gave one final scream. When the first cry sounded, Minato wasn't quite sure where it was coming from. He barely heard Bawako's order of hot water, or her assistant's reply. All he could concentrate on was the beautiful sound of their child's first loud wail. With wide eyes he watched as the Hokage's wife wrapped up the small fragile body in a warm blanket. Wiping away the tears burning in his eyes, Minato couldn't help but let out a happy, "I'm a father today." With a relieved sigh, Jiraiya brought an arm up to wipe away the sweat on his brow before turning to him with a grin and a congratulatory pat. As Bawako carried the still crying child towards him, Minato reached out a hand with a call of, "Naruto." "Don't touch the child," the stern woman instantly rebuked. "The mother gets to see first." Suitably chastised, he dropped his hand and couldn't help the pout that came to his lips as Naruto was brought to Kushina's side. Upon hearing her gently whisper, "I finally get to see you," his pout quickly morphed into a warm smile. "You'll have lots of time later," Bawako assured her before turning to Naruto and gently cooing, There. Smiling widely, he turned to Kushina. As he did so, he felt the color drain from his face. "Sensei," he yelled as he ran to her side. Upon realizing what was happening, Jiraiya immediately brought his hands to Kushina's stomach and without a hint of hesitation began to seal the kyubi. To both their horror, instead of receding, the seal continued to unravel, long tendrils reaching out to wind over Kushina's body as the familiar foul red chakra began to surround her. "It's breaking, Minato," Kushina gasped. In a panic, Minato quickly took his sensei's place and tried his hand at the seal. Just like with Jiraiya, nothing happened. "Minato, get me away from here. Get me away from Naruto," he heard her beg, just before a scream was torn from her lips. Unwilling to give up, he was about to try again when all of a sudden a dark mass began pouring from the seal. A dark swirl of chakra so strong he felt as if he was being weighed down by the sudden wave of malevolence it exuded. With a glance at the two clearly horrified women across from him, one of which was holding Naruto in her arms, Minato carefully lifted Kushina into his arms and in a blink teleported them both away. Once at their destination, just outside his safe house on the outskirts of the village, Minato was about to lower her down on the soft grass when he was suddenly forced away by a loud roar. Ignoring the burns he could feel flicking at the skin of his arms and torso, he lifted his head and felt his eyes widen at the sight before him. It was Kyubi. Though not yet solid, there was no mistaking the form of the red chakra that was spilling from Kushina's seal. "Yondaime," the beast growled, turning to grin at him for a split second before propelling itself completely out, leaving nothing but the fallen body of his wife behind. In an instant he was by her side, needing to make sure that she was all right before he could even begin to try and process what was going on. To his immense relief, he found her not only alive but still fully conscious. What happened?" she weakly questioned. As he gathered her back into his arms, Minato frowned. For all his genius, he found himself unable to answer her. "I don't know," he replied somewhat shakily, the last few moments making absolutely no sense to him at all. The seal had broken. Kyuubi had escaped. Yet there was absolutely no sign of it. Even at the distance they were, there was no way they wouldn't be able to sense it. That foul chakra. There was no way it could just disappear. Naruto, she suddenly cried in alarm. I want to see Naruto. Holding her close, Minato silently nodded and faster than a blink teleported back to the cave. Still on alert, he immediately found his eyes drawn to where his sensei stood, face drawn with uneasiness as he hovered over a completely uncovered and bawling Naruto. What's wrong? He demanded as he took in the scene before him. He was startled at the sight of the clearly shaken Byakugan, whose arms bore the same burn marks as his. At his words, Jiraiya spun around. Though his eyes held relief upon seeing that Kushina was for the most part unhurt, the tension on his face remained. There was a sudden wave of chakra. The killer intent. It was like nothing I've ever experienced, the Sannin began to explain. When I heard the roar and saw it come pouring in, I was so sure it was the Kyuubi coming to finish us off. There was a brief pause. But then it just disappeared. Disappeared. Minato repeated in disbelief, unable to comprehend how such a thing was possible. It shot towards Naruto. Byakugan interrupted shakily, the simple explanation perfectly explaining her current state. It surrounded Naruto's body and then it was gone, just completely gone. But that's not the strangest part, Jiraiya added before waving him forward. Look. With Kushina still in his arms, he approached the bed where Naruto was laid. As he did so, Jiraiya held out a hand over Naruto's stomach and with a gentle pulse began channeling his chakra, an action in which seemed to cause the small body before them some measure of discomfort if the loud cry the action managed to elicit was anything to go by. Frowning, Minato was just about to demand his sensei put a stop to whatever it was he was doing when it appeared. Impossible, both he and Kushina breathed at the same time. Gently placing her down beside Naruto, he allowed his eyes to roam over the visible seal. The same seal he had been working on ever since he learnt of the pregnancy. A seal he could have only performed with the help of the Shinigami, the eight-sided seal. With a satisfied grin, Kurama lazily opened his eyes to stare down his muzzle at the familiar tuft of bright blonde spikes before him. At the sight that greeted him, the great nine tails, the most powerful of all the tailed beasts, couldn't help but let out an amused laugh. Dressed in the ever-familiar orange jumpsuit and looking very much like his sexy no jutsu form was the very irate Naruto Uzumaki. It's not funny, Datbeo. His loudmouth of a vessel proclaimed. Why am I a girl, you bastard fox? Is this your idea of some kind of sick joke? Believe or not, brat, but this is not my doing, he replied with a large grin. It is, as you weaklings call it, just an added perk of the process. An added perk? The former boy screeched at a decibel that he was sure could crack glass. His voice barely changed in spite of everything. Shut it, you ungrateful idiot, Kurama growled out at the sudden assault on his ears, unable to help but wonder why on earth he was subjecting himself to the brat's unholy screaming and hollering all over again. As bad as he was now, the legendary fox couldn't help but recall how grating Naruto was when he was nothing more than a snot-nosed kid with an even higher-pitched voice than the one he had now. He winced at the thought of that being permanent. If his banshee of a mother was anything to go by, the next few years were going to be an even greater annoyance than the first time round. Not technically true. But his vessel didn't need to know that. Anyway, what difference does it make? He demanded sharply, cutting off the tirade he knew was coming. At the sudden silence that followed, he scoffed derisively. Had you known that would have changed your decision? You would let something as insignificant as this make your choice for you and risk losing it all once more? Because if that is the case, then maybe I should have just left you to take your last breath out on the battlefield instead of wasting my time and power on such a weak-minded brat like you. At this rate, you might as well just let me out and allow me to save Madara the trouble by razing this whole place to the ground. At least I would be able to accomplish the task of getting rid of quite a few of his greatest pawns. Damn it. Naruto swore. Despite the addition of long blonde pigtails and a slightly more feminine face, there was no disputing the fact that the girl that stood before him was indeed the same brat he had come to recognize if the determined glare being directed his way was anything to go by. "You're a right bastard, you know that, you stupid old fox." Let it not be said the great Nine Tails did not know how to motivate people. "But you're right," the brat conceded rather grudgingly before exclaiming, "I've never quit or run away from anything, and I'm not about to now. Girl or boy, I'm going to kick anyone who even so much as tries to touch my comrades. Bring it on, Datbayo." With a satisfied grin, Kurama was just about to voice his approval when the 16-year-old before him suddenly shrunk. Visibly shocked by the occurrence, Naruto looked down. "What's happening to me?" Realizing what was going on, Kurama simply replied, "You're a baby." "Not a baby." Long resigned to the fact that his container could at times be more than a little idiotic despite moments of sheer brilliance, he explained, "Mentally you may be 16, but physically you are nothing more than a newborn. At the moment your body is barely developed, which means physically your brain has not yet established the neural capacity necessary to accommodate your adult mind." He paused for a moment and, unable to help himself, added, "No matter how simple it may be." Though from the perplexed look on the idiot's face it was clear that while Naruto barely understood his explanation, it seemed there was one thing the former boy was able to grasp perfectly. No doubt catching the jibe, the now 8-year body of his vessel stamped a foot indignantly. Ignoring the display, Kurama continued, "You will still have your memories, but you won't be able to make sense of it until your body is ready. Until your mind is developed enough to be able to comprehend it all, you will have to relearn everything. Even if instinctively you may already know how to do some things, you will need to work hard to regain yourself, to get back your strength and your mind." "What does that mean?" "It means, brat, for all intents and purposes you will truly be a baby," was his simple reply. "What? How I'm opposed to help, ain't anything like this," the said brat demanded, frown deepening as her speech began to reflect the continued shrinking of both her mental age and body. "Don't worry. There is time, brat. You have years before we need to act." "But what if it goes wrong?" Naruto questioned with the slightest hint of fear. "What if I know, member?" Staring down at the now 3-year-old that stood before him, Kurama leant forward and reached out with a large paw. With his claws curled into a fist, he gazed down at the blonde without a word. Yet even in the deafening silence that befell the both of them, they each knew exactly what he was asking for. What he wanted. For a moment the miniature Naruto did no more than return his stare. Then finally taking a step forward, the girl brought her own fist up and somewhat grudgingly gave him what he was sure was supposed to be a hard bump. "You dear Ta, help me," the brat said, the earlier fear completely gone. "Dat what team, Atesh do." At the unflinching belief in those words, Kurama felt the corners of his muzzle lifting even as he roughly grunted, "Don't get too sappy, brat. I won't hesitate to eat you if you dare make me suffer your embarrassing idiocy and weakness this time round." "Ya, ya," was the casual reply that was accompanied by a wide grin from the now barely standing toddler. "Kuma luff na. Yeah, whatever, you stupid idiot," he scoffed. "Make sure you get stronger and get me out of this cage faster this time, brat." At those words the tiny infant that now lay on its back before him merely gurgled happily, tiny hands reaching up towards him with a demanding cry. With a sigh, Kurama lowered his head to rest atop his paws and closed his eyes. As much as the older Naruto annoyed him, at least the brat was never boring. He cracked an eye open to give the giggling child a rather baleful look. These next few years were definitely going to be a great test of his patience. Unlike the idiotic humans, he could not understand the fascination and excitement over babies. All they do is sleep, eat and poop. In the days following Naruto's birth, Minato Namikaze threw himself into trying to figure out what had happened almost obsessively. For all his genius, he found himself completely stumped. Even with Kushina's help, who was still recovering from the birth and extraction, they weren't any closer to finding a plausible explanation for how the Kyuubi ended up sealed within their daughter. Every clue they discovered only led to more questions. Like their discovery of the existence of a key to the seal, a key that had been inscribed on the toad Garotora, who when questioned could only tell them that it had just suddenly appeared the very same night Naruto was born. Then there was also the additional mystery of the beast calling him Yondaime upon its release, growling the name out to him as if it was nothing more than a mere fact. It was a mystery, and the only answer he could come up with was one that was too far-fetched to be considered feasible. Yet it was one he could not allow himself to dismiss, even though he knew there was no way to prove it. While he knew there were ways of speaking to the beast in order to try and get some answers, it was not something either he or Kushina wanted to subject their daughter to. Not unless they absolutely had to. He was just glad that no one saw fit to even try to suggest such a thing. The only people who knew of what truly happened, that being the Sandaime, his wife and her assistant, trusted them enough to leave well enough alone. As for everybody else, well, since the beast was contained just as soon as it was released, it didn't take very much to convince the council that they were the ones to seal the Kyuubi into Naruto when the seal seemingly broke. As the three greatest seal masters in Konohagakure, and with Kushina's expertise as an Uzumaki to back them up, they were easily able to convince everybody of what had happened. At least for now. With a sigh, Minato waved the troubling thoughts aside. Though it bothered him to not know for sure, he did know one thing, and that was the Kyuubi was completely contained, a fact both Jiraiya and Kushina could attest to. In the end, what mattered was that Naruto was safe. All he could do was to continue to monitor the situation and make sure the seal remained strong. There will be a time when it will no longer be needed, but that was a long time coming, and right now he needed to concentrate on what was most important, his daughter. "She's perfect," Minato found himself whispering as he stared down at the tiny hands clasping his finger in wonder. Aside from Kushina, she was the single most beautiful thing he had ever seen. While she had his coloring, Naruto was definitely her mother's daughter. The shape of her eyes, the cute yet stubborn jut of her chin, and the pout of her lips was definitely all Kushina. "She is, isn't she?" Kushina agreed from where she sat beside him, a radiant smile curving her lips as they both looked into the precious bundle in the cot before them. Ever since Kushina and Naruto were released from the hospital, Minato had decided to take a well-needed break from his duties. Aside from wanting to ensure that the Kyuubi was truly sealed, he also wanted to spend time with his new family. Considering how close he had come to losing them both, it was understandable for him not to want to let either one of them out of his sight. "She looks so much like you," his wife said as she gently ran her fingers over the whisker-like marks that lined both sides of their daughter's cheeks. With a twinkle in her eyes, she lightly teased, "Let's just hope she doesn't turn out as flaky." "Knowing my luck, she'll probably end up having your temper," Minato murmured to himself. As much as he loved her, there was a reason why she was called the red-hot-blooded habanero, and even though she had calmed considerably since their academy days, she was still prone to violent outbursts when angered. "What was that?" Kushina demanded with a crack in her knuckles. "I was just saying how lucky I would be if Naruto turned out to be as wonderful, smart and generous as her beautiful mother, of course," he quickly answered, swallowing down a nervous gulp. "That's what I thought you said," she cheerfully said. With a clap of her hands, she stood up and announced, "Now be a dear and get Naruto-chan ready for me while I prepare her bath." Holding their daughter in front of him like a shield, Minato meekly nodded. Unable to do a thing but watch as his wife practically skipped her way towards the bathroom. It was only once she was gone did he let out a sigh of relief before looking down at the big blue eyes staring right back at him. With a smile, he leant down to place a gentle kiss on Naruto's nose, causing her to go cross-eyed for a moment. As he pulled away, he whispered, "Just between you and me, Naruto, I kind of wish you do end up exactly like your mother, temper and all." Just as he was about to gather her bath towel and a change of clothes, he felt a pair of damp hands wrap around his neck. At the touch of lips, Minato smiled as he returned the kiss. As they drew apart he couldn't help but ask, "Not that I am complaining, but what was that for?" "Nothing," Kushina cheekily replied. Without another word she withdrew completely from him in order to carefully pick up their baby daughter from her cot. Then stopping at the threshold of the door tilted her head back to command, "Hurry up Minato. You don't want Naruto-chan catching a cold just because her father was too damn slow with her things, do you Databane?" As the first of their generation to become parents, it wasn't surprising for Kushina to find her and her family the subject of great interest. In the week following their release from the hospital, the new parents were barely able to catch a moment's peace. While many would think having a newborn would make this a foregone conclusion, the truth of the matter was Naruto was a perfect angel. Unlike the horror stories she had heard of long sleepless nights, Kushina and Minato were quick to discover their child was the most cheerful little girl in the whole wide world. Apart from the occasional cry when she was hungry or needed a diaper change, Naruto hardly cried at all. In all actuality, their lack of rest had absolutely nothing to do with their darling daughter and everything to do with the sudden influx of uninvited guests to their home. One after the other, Kushina and her husband had found themselves playing hosts to more guests to their home in the last few days than they have had in the whole year since they decided to move in together. It didn't help that their precious daughter was also quite the charmer. Already she had both the legendary Toad Sannin and the third Hokage wrapped around her tiny fingers. The way she had instantly latched onto them, squealing happily whilst staring up at them with guileless blue eyes, had left the most powerful men in the village looking completely smitten as they held her for the first time. Even the stoic Uchiha heir Fugaku and the Hyuga twins Hiashi and Hizashi couldn't help but be charmed by her. Though they had been afraid all the attention might upset and overwhelm their newborn daughter, she was far from troubled. In fact, she seemed to enjoy all the attention their friends lavished upon her. From allowing Makoto to hold her without the slightest of fuss to gurgling joyfully at the funny faces Choza would make at her when he visited with his teammates, their daughter responded to almost everybody with more good humor than either of them would have come to expect. The only glaring exception came in the form of her response to Jiraiya's teammate, Orochimaru. It was perhaps the only time either of them had truly experienced the horrors of what many other new parents often faced. As soon as the snake Sannin was introduced, their daughter had practically began screaming bloody murder. Even now Kushina wasn't quite sure what set Naruto off, but she couldn't help but be somewhat glad for it, especially as it had given them the perfect excuse to usher the man out so they could tend her to their daughter. Whilst the Hokage and Jiraiya trusted him, she couldn't help but be wary of his interest in Naruto. Though now months later the sudden spate of visits were few and far in between, it wasn't uncommon for Naruto's godmother to unexpectedly drop by in her free time. So when there was a knock on the door one lazy afternoon, Kushina wasn't at all surprised to find Makoto at their front step. What did give her pause, however, was the sight of the little boy who accompanied her friend. Though she could not see any sign of the familiar white and red fan anywhere on the child's clothing, there was no mistaking those features. Given the fact Makoto's relationship with Fugaku Uchiha was the worst-kept secret in the village, she didn't need her husband's genius to conclude where she'd picked up the dark-haired child from. "Now who is this little cutie?" Kushina lightly teased, a grin spreading across her face as she gave Makoto a slightly suggestive look. "Did you and Fugaku forget to tell us all something?" With a roll of her eyes, Makoto ignored her and, smiling down at the boy half hiding behind her legs, explained, "Obito-kun, this is my friend Kushina. Please ignore most of what comes out of her mouth unless you want your brain to rot to her level." "Hey," she protested before falling back into a pout that belied her years. Lifting her head up to meet her with a serene smile, Makoto went on to say, "Kushina, this is Obito-kun, Fugaku's nephew. I'm looking after him this afternoon and thought we'll drop by to give poor little Naruto-chan a break from her motor mouth of a mom." Quote, Although she had calmed down and matured considerably over the years, Kushina was still very much a creature of impulse. Rather than delivering a witty comeback, she instead poked her tongue out, much to Makoto's amusement, before deciding to completely snub her friend in order to turn her full attention to the wide-eyed boy staring up at her. With a wide grin she leaned down and said, "Hello Obito-kun, would you like to come meet Naruto-chan?" "Can I?" he asked with a hint of shyness. It must not have been very characteristic of the boy if Makoto's amusement was any indication. "Of course Squirt," Kushina replied. Unable to help herself, she ruffled his hair before stepping aside to invite the pair in. Once they cleared the door, she gently closed it behind them and began leading the pair to where she had left Naruto in her bassinet. At the happy squeals that greeted her return, Kushina carefully lifted Naruto out from the comfort of her blankets. If there was one thing she has learnt about their little girl in the short time they have gotten to know her, it was that she loved being held. Mindful of her head, she sat down on the couch and called over to the dark-haired boy, "Come here Obito-kun and say hello to Naruto-chan." With Makoto hot on his heels, Obito made his way towards them, stopping only a few inches away to peer down at the wide-eyed baby in her arms. "Cute," came his odd appraisal. However, rather than being equally charmed by the older boy the instant her blue eyes met that of the young Uchiha, the usually cheerful baby burst into tears. Flabbergasted at the reaction, Kushina remained still for a moment in her shock. Then quickly regaining herself, she pulled Naruto to her chest. "Don't cry Naruto-chan," Kushina cooed, gently rubbing her back in soothing circles as she continued to murmur sweet assurances to her distressed daughter. Helplessly she looked up to find Makoto comforting an equally tearful Obito. "Wah, she hates me," the boy cried. Feeling bad, Kushina was just about to make an excuse for her daughter's uncharacteristic reaction when she felt a movement against chest. No doubt hearing Obito's own cries now that hers had died down to a light hiccup, Naruto began shifting against her, her head jerking to the side in a clear attempt to turn around. Carefully Kushina maneuvered the fussing baby around so that she could clearly see how upset Obito was. The moment Naruto's wide blue eyes took in the scene before her, she let out a cry of "Ah!" and began waving her arms, as if trying to get the boy's attention. "Obito-kun, I think Naruto is ready to say hello now," she called out. At her words he wiped his eyes and turned to the baby in her arms with a sniffle of, "What if she cries again?" "She won't, I promise," Kushina assured, even though she wasn't too sure herself. Especially since the last time she had seen her daughter react in such a way was with Orochimaru, and the man hasn't been able to get close ever since. Not without setting her off. "Oki," Obito hesitantly nodded. As if to encourage him, Naruto let out a cheerful squeal. It seemed to have done the trick. With renewed confidence the boy made his way to them and stopped only a few inches away. "Hello Naruto-chan," he greeted while holding his hand out in a wave. This time Naruto saw fit to return the greeting with a long look. Just when she was sure her daughter was going to shatter the boy's hopes once more by bursting into tears for a second time, Naruto held her own hand up in a clumsy mimic of a wave. Encouraged, Obito smiled and chirped, "She said hello to me." Once she was certain another outburst wasn't forthcoming, Kushina gave Makoto a smile as young Obito quickly got over his initial shyness and began to make funny faces in an attempt to get a laugh from the curious baby in her arms. When his efforts were finally rewarded with a happy giggle, Obito gifted them all with a wide smile that seemed to stretch across his whole face as he turned excitedly to Makoto to boast, "Hee hee, she likes me." In spite of the discouraging start, she was certain her little Naruto had just made her first friend. Ever since the first time he laid eyes on Kushina, Minato never thought he could come to love anyone as much as he loved the fiery redhead who had completely stolen his heart. For the longest time he was certain there was nothing left of him to give. Yet the moment he laid eyes upon her, their beautiful daughter, he found himself falling in love all over again. From the instant those big blue eyes met his, Minato knew he was a goner. At 5 months old, Naruto was already growing up so fast. It wouldn't be long before she was talking. Of all the things he imagined, he never imagined it happening like this. It all started innocently enough, first with a family outing to the park and then with the unexpected appearance of his sensei Jiraiya. Somehow it ended with his sensei doing one of his dramatic self-introductions complete with kabuki poses and all. It was too bad that rather than boasting about his status as one of the legendary Sannin, he instead decided to proudly proclaim himself a super pervert. Too bad, because rather than the much anticipated mommy or daddy, Naruto instead yelled out a word that shouldn't be in any child's vocabulary. Especially not babies as innocent and cute as their Naruto-chan. Come on Naruto, say it with me, say Dad-D, Minato coaxed as he sat with Naruto underneath the shade of a large tree, desperately trying to erase the word from his child's mind. In response, Naruto merely blinked up at him with a giggle before continuing to blab a string of oohs and ahs back at him. Not one to give up so easily, he was just about to try again when there came a sudden crash. Clearly more interested in what was going on behind him, she clapped her hands eagerly as her mother sent Jiraiya crashing through yet another tree with a well-aimed punch. Arrow, Naruto repeated happily as she pointed to the man getting the ever-living snot beaten out of him. No, Naruto-chan, he lightly admonished. Say Dad-D. At that she blinked up at him with a frown, as if she was concentrating hard in order to form the words. Barely unable to contain himself, he watched with bated breath as she opened her little mouth and let out a loud burp. Damn it, he swore. Amit, he heard an echo in the form of a sweet babyish voice and felt his eyes go wide with barely concealed horror. No, Minato cried, lifting little Naruto from the cushioned baby seat they had brought with them. Do not repeat that ever again. Repeat what exactly? Came the sound of his doom. Nothing, dear, he unconvincingly replied, wondering when on earth she had decided to stop beating his sensei and exactly how much she heard. Oh really? Kushina returned dangerously, all the while crackling her knuckles as she stalked her way towards him, the furious look on her face telling him everything he needed to know. As his wife neared, Minato gulped and did what any sane man would do in his position. He held Naruto before him like a shield. Not once breaking in her stride, Kushina continued her advance, and just as she was about to reach him, he felt his heart almost stop at the cry of, "Mommy." Suddenly everybody froze. Dadi. Heart swelling at the words, Minato was just about to bring Naruto to him into a hug when she was snatched right out of his arms. Say mommy again, my beautiful little genius, Kushina immediately gushed as she planted loving kisses all over their giggling daughter's face. Come on Naruto-chan, say mommy. Say daddy again, Minato chimed in excitedly, only to find himself instantly going quiet at the near-death glare his wife sent his way. It seemed his earlier faux pas was far from forgotten. It didn't take a genius to realize it was in his best interest to stay out of his wife's way. So rather than rushing to smother Naruto in hugs and kisses and more pleas to say daddy again and again like he wanted to, he instead went to go check on his sensei. He was about to approach the still twitching pervert when he heard a familiar cry of, Amit, and immediately froze. Sensing his immediate doom, he slowly turned his head around to see Kushina calmly placing Naruto down on her baby seat before straightening up. For a second she did not move. Then with a slowness that must have been deliberate, she lifted her head to pin him with a glare that would have reduced a lesser man into a whimpering mess. Minato namikaze, she breathed out in a low snarl. He took a step back. Another step. And another. Dead. As her parents moved around her in flashes of yellow and orange, Naruto merely continued clapping and laughing. In the weeks following Naruto's first words, it seemed like a dam had suddenly burst. Like a little parrot, she began repeating nearly everything that was said around her. Fugaku barely escaped a double beating when an accidental utterance of, shit, resulted in a loud chirp of, "She," from a giggy Naruto. Yoshino basically dragged a resigned Shikaku away by the ear for in her words, infecting the next generation with his laziness at the cute cry of, "Ubsam," from Naruto's lips. Even the stoic Hiyashi and his twin Hizashi didn't escape unscathed. Though neither would own up to being the one responsible for Naruto somehow learning to say, "UCK," both were taught an extremely painful lesson in watching what they say around little minds. Luckily for the parents, Naruto would usually only say a word once and then just as quickly forget it again. Much to their annoyance and Jiraiya's utmost pain, they were never able to erase the dreaded word Naruto first uttered from her limited vocabulary. Upon discovering it was actually what she took to calling the toad Sanin whenever he was around, Kushina was quick to find she didn't mind as much. It was a rather apt name after all. As for Naruto herself, the little troublemaker found great joy in the ensuing chaos her newfound speech has so far unleashed. At only 6 months old, Naruto was already establishing herself as a rather cheeky child. While Minato despaired, Kushina couldn't be prouder. At the tender age of 5, Kakashi Hatake was well on his way to becoming one of the strongest ninjas in the village. In spite of just entering the academy already, he has proven himself more than capable. With an intelligent mind and a natural aptitude for the ninja arts, there weren't very many things he couldn't do. So while others struggled, Kakashi merely went through the motions, going through every lesson with a practiced ease that, although was far removed from any form of arrogance, seemed to have drawn the ire of a few and at the same time inspired the adulation of the rest of his classmates. None of whom were more vocal about their feelings than the single Uchiha in the class, the dark-haired goggle-wearing boy who had glared at him at the entrance ceremony. The same one who had for some reason taken his general aloofness, the calm and detached demeanor he regarded everybody with, as a personal affront. Ignoring the sour look being directed his way for once again taking the top spot in yet another sparring match, the young Hatake patiently waited for class to be dismissed before silently going on his way. Unlike the children whose parents often came to meet them at the gates, Kakashi was used to walking home without an escort. As the son of Konoha's White Fang, a man whose status was only rivaled by that of the 3 legendary Sannin, he had long learnt that his father was someone who was always going to be in high demand. So though he knew the man himself would love nothing more than to walk him home from the academy, his many responsibilities meant he simply couldn't. Rather than pout and throw a tantrum like any other child his age, he instead decided to direct all his efforts into becoming a great ninja, a ninja strong and powerful enough to be able to stand beside his father. Instead of going straight home, Kakashi found his way to his favorite training spot. While everything seemed to have come easily for him, it did not mean he didn't train. Intelligence and knowledge would only get him so far. Without the proper strength and control, there was no way he could even begin to think about performing any technique beyond the requisite E ranks taught in the academy. Although the Genin test was going to be a cinch for him, Kakashi was aiming to make Chunin by the end of the year. Producing a kunai from one of his pouches, he stood before one of the trees in the small clearing. He was just about to make his way up the tree using the chakra control exercise he found in his father's study when a sudden movement to his left caught his attention. Acting on instinct, he quickly spun around and immediately maneuvered into a battle stance. However, at the sight to greet him, Kakashi found himself slowly lowering his kunai with a confused frown. There, sitting on the grass with a carefree smile and happily picking at the few dandelions to be found in the small clearing, was a little girl, one who couldn't have been more than 12 months old if her size was of any indication. With bright blonde hair and even brighter blue eyes, she was dressed in a teddy one-piece that was an almost blinding shade of orange. As he stared, he couldn't help but notice the smears of dirt all over her, the majority of which was concentrated on the curve of her knees and her bare palms. The telltale signs revealing exactly how it was she had gotten to the training grounds. What he wanted to know was what kind of idiot allowed a baby to crawl away from them. Not quite sure what to do, Kakashi remained where he was. Bringing a dandelion close to her face, the little girl carefully inspected it for a moment before pursing her lips together to blow at the flower head, her white eyes looking on in fascination as the tiny white florets broke away to hover around her. At that she waved her hands happily, lips twisting into a pout when all the florets disappeared in the wind. Throwing the empty stem away, her gaze darted about the place in search of yet another of the flowering weed. "Ha!" she squealed, a bright smile lighting up her face the moment her eyes fell on him. Faster than he thought possible, the baby girl began crawling towards him, not stopping until she sat at his feet. The top of her head only barely reaching his knees, she tilted her face up to pin him with her all-too-wide eyes. Coupled with the 3 whisker-like marks he had only just noticed on her cheeks, he couldn't help but think of a baby kitten. Though he was considerably more mature than a regular 5-year-old, Kakashi felt his fingers twitch at the sight. Silently, the young prodigy barely fought down the urge to pet the undeniably cute little baby before him. "Oop," he heard her demand as she held her arms up to him. At that, Kakashi merely stared blankly back at her. When no action was forthcoming, her lips quivered and blue eyes shone brightly as she again implored with arms out, "Oop." Although he wasn't well versed in baby talk, he didn't need to be to recognize when the universal sign to be picked up was being directed at him. While he never remembered doing the same as a baby, he had seen other children, even at his age, using the gesture often enough in order to get their parents to pick them up. Was his oh-so-smart reply. At a loss, Kakashi was just about to go find an adult when he heard a sniffle. Alarmed at the sight of the watery blue eyes and trembling lips, he found himself kneeling down. Not quite sure what he was doing, he wrapped his arms around the crying baby and supported the little girl as best he could, lifted her up and into his arms. The moment he did, the tears instantly ceased. "Ha!" she murmured happily. In spite of the fact all his training had made him stronger than most 5-year-olds, he still needed both arms to properly support the weight of the young baby. With his hands occupied, he could do nothing but stare as she reached for the black mask covering his face. "There you are!" came a sudden cry, the relief palpable in every word. At the interruption, she let go of his mask. Her face twisted into a cute little scowl. Thankfully, she only managed to reveal a bit of his nose, and that for the most part his mask was still in place. He turned to the source of the loud voice. Not knowing why, Kakashi tightened his hold on the child in his arms, eyes narrowing suspiciously at the newcomer. "Hey kid, thanks for finding the brat for me," the strangely familiar white-haired man said. Grinning in a way that did absolutely nothing to put him at ease, the man leant down and said to him in a conspiratory whisper, "Let's just keep this between us, okay kid? Her mother would kill me if she ever found out I lost the brat." Not even waiting for a response, he reached for the orange-clad child in Kakashi's arms. Before the young Hitaki could react, the little girl turned towards the stranger and with a wave of her arm smacked him away. "No!" the baby yelled, blonde brows twisting into an unhappy frown. "Bah! Arrow bah!" Although Kakashi knew young children only knew a few words and barely understood what they were saying, he found himself physically turning the little girl away from the man's reach. The fact she seemed to recognize the stranger and recognize him well enough to call him a pervert instantly began setting off alarm bells. If there was one thing his father had made sure to drill into his head, it was that not everybody was kind to children. "I think you should step away," Kakashi warned. His usual apathetic attitude gave way to an unexpected surge of protectiveness. No doubt realizing what was going through the young Hitaki's head, the white-haired stranger spluttered and with an indignant sound pointed an accusing finger at the blonde baby in his arms. "Stop giving people the wrong idea, you brat," he yelled before turning and set his finger to Kakashi to add, "And you other brat, don't start getting any stupid ideas in that head of yours. I may be a pervert, but I'm not that kind of pervert." "Blah, Arrow," the baby responded before sticking out her tongue and blowing the clearly peeved man a raspberry. While the interaction between the two was enough to convince the boy the white-haired man wasn't that kind of a pervert, She was familiar enough with him to be scared of him if he was still somewhat reluctant to just hand her over to anyone other than her parents. Come on Naruto-chan, your mother's going to start getting worried if I don't get you back soon, the stranger conjuled, holding out his arms towards the small baby. Mommy. The little girl whose name he now knew to be Naruto chirped. At the feel of the arms around his neck beginning to loosen, Kakashi gave the man before him an even look and, leaving no room for argument, coolly stated, "I can carry her." As if only realizing he was still there, the white-haired man turned to him with a clearly assessing look. He must have known his offer stemmed from far more than just a simple outpouring of altruism if the annoyed twitch was anything to go by. Fine, the man agreed reluctantly. Just remember not to say a thing about Naruto getting away from me, okay? Not caring in the least about tattling on the weird man even though he probably deserved it, Kakashi simply replied, "Fine." Again the stranger stared at him. Whatever he found must have been to his satisfaction, because suddenly he stood up and with a wide grin made to slap Kakashi on the back. Not missing a beat, the young prodigy sidestepped what he supposed was to be a friendly pat and simply stared at the man expectantly. The youth of today, no sense of camaraderie at all, the man complained with a grumble. Right then, come on kid. Her mother is waiting and if we're just a second late she'll definitely have my balls. With that said he turned around. Save for the occasional giggle and babble from the bundle in his arms, the strange-looking pair silently made their way through the village. When finally they came to a stop in front of a nondescript home located in the middle of town, Kakashi did no more than silently observe as the man knocked loudly on the door. If he had any doubts before the moment he laid eyes upon the red-haired woman, every last one of them was put to rest. While her coloring was different to the child in his arms, there was no denying the resemblance. The girl in his arms was definitely her daughter. "About time, you pervert," the woman said, glaring at the white-haired man with a discerning eye. "Ah, Kushina-chan, don't be like that. I told you I'll have her home right on time. And that's the only reason you're still standing right now," she returned snippily. Feigning a shot to the heart, the strange man stumbled back to dramatically proclaim, "I'm hurt, Kushina-chan. I offered to look after my darling goddaughter out of the goodness of my own heart, and this is how I'm treated." Less than convinced, she placed a hand on her hip. Then narrowing her eyes she returned with, "Naruto-chan would have been perfectly fine at home while I was making dinner, you damn pervert. I better not find out you took her anywhere near the hot springs or else." Even though it wasn't aimed at him, Kakashi could practically feel the weight of the threat hanging in the air. "Of course not," the white-haired man protested a little too profusely, causing Naruto's mother to glare at him suspiciously. Before Kakashi realized what was happening, he was being pushed forward. Barely keeping his balance, he found himself right in front of the red-headed woman, acting as a human shield between her and the self-proclaimed pervert that was now standing behind both him and the happy baby in his arms. "I took her to the park. Look, see, I have this brat to prove it." Finally noticing his presence, Naruto's mother stared down at him for a moment before breaking into a warm smile as she took in the sight of her blonde daughter cuddled up against him. For the moment forgetting about the white-haired man, she gushed, "Ah, who have you got there, Naruto-chan?" "Mommy," Naruto cried happily. My, only 1 year old and already my cute little daughter has excellent taste. You've got yourself a cutie there, Naruto-chan," she teased good-naturedly as she reached forward to gently tap her smiling daughter on the nose, the action causing the baby to go cross-eyed for a moment before bursting into the cutest of giggles. Thankfully for the mask covering his face, Kakashi ducked his head even though he knew no one could see the blush burning his cheeks. When he was certain his whole face wasn't going up in flames, he chanced a look. Catching his gaze, Kushina tilted her head to the side and gave him a smile so reminiscent of her daughter he couldn't help but feel his cheeks burn at the sight. "You're Kakashi, Tsukumo-san's little boy, right?" she questioned. Not at all surprised, Kakashi merely nodded. For as long as he could remember he has heard people comment on his resemblance to his father. It wasn't uncommon for people to recognize him because of it. "Tsukumo's son," the white-haired man exclaimed from behind him. Although he couldn't see him, he could practically feel his eyes. It was enough to make him uncomfortable. Unable to keep the disbelief from his tone, Kakashi dubiously questioned, "You know my father?" "Of course I do," the man replied with a hint of affront. "We fought together in the Second War more times than I can count." At those words, Kakashi tilted his head back. For the first time since meeting him, the young Hitaki looked at the man, really looked at him. Wearing a short shirt, kimono and a red haori, the white-haired man was dressed like no other ninja in the village he had ever come across. Noticing the horned forehead protector engraved with the kanji for oil on it, the young Hitaki couldn't help but wonder where his Konoha one was. Unable to feel somewhat dubious, he found himself turning to Naruto's mother for guidance. As much as it doesn't seem like it, he is actually a very formidable ninja, Kushina confessed to the boy. "Formidable ninja," the man repeated. With that he spun around with a flourish and then, hopping in what could only be described as a dance, fell into a kabuki pose. "I am more than formidable. I am Mount Myoboku's holy master Sennin, also known as the Toad Sennin. I am Jiraiya the Great." While Kushina sighed, Kakashi slowly blinked. Naruto on the other hand clapped her hands cheerfully at the display. Though he often heard it uttered as a joke, he couldn't help but think that they were right to say the stronger the ninja, the weirder the person. The thought made him wonder what kind of an adult he would turn out to be, especially if he ended up being even half as powerful as everybody was predicting. "You're one of the legendary Sannin," Kakashi uttered with a slow blink of disbelief. "Afraid so, kiddo," Kushina muttered like she hardly believed it herself. "Ah, Kushina-chan is so cold," Jiraiya complained. Rolling her eyes, she turned her attention back to Kakashi and her daughter. With a smile she held her hands out to little Naruto, who graciously allowed herself to be detached from his arms. Feeling suddenly exposed, he quickly shoved his hands into the pocket of his black pants with an air of detachment he did not feel. "By the way, Kakashi-kun, your father is on a mission at the moment, isn't he?" Kushina asked as she stood up with Naruto in her arms. At that he gave a nod. Since his father was visibly absent from the village, it wasn't a secret he was probably on a mission. "I was sure I remembered Minato saying something about joining Tsukumo-san on this one," she explained with a fond smile at the mention of Minato. Then looking at him with a slight frown, she asked, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but who takes care of you when your father is away?" "I have a caretaker that cooks for me," he answered with a frown. Not quite sure why she was asking. "She usually leaves me for the night after she finishes making dinner." Though he could clearly see she was less than happy with his answer, she gave him a warm smile and said, "With Minato away, Naruto and I get awfully lonely at home by ourselves. Would you mind staying with us until Naruto's father comes back?" Once she finished, he frowned, easily seeing through her flimsy excuse. Not liking the fact he was being pitied, nor that his father's care of him was being questioned, Kakashi opened his mouth and was just about to politely refuse when he felt a hand on his head. "I think that is a great idea, Kushina-chan," the white-haired man Jiraiya of the legendary 3 saw fit to reply for him. "I'll take Kakashi-kun home to inform his caretaker where he'll be and grab a few things. Just make sure you don't take too long," Kushina warned the pair. "We're having dinner as soon as I get Naruto-chan cleaned up." With that, both her and Naruto cheerfully waved them off as Jiraiya all but the frog marched him away. "I'm not coming back," Kakashi firmly stated as soon as they were far enough away. "A word of advice, kid. When a beautiful woman asks you to stay the night, you best just nod and do whatever it is she says," the self-proclaimed pervert saw fit to tell him. "I'm not coming back," he repeated resolutely. No doubt realizing he was serious, the man sighed. "Look, kid, trust me when I say Kushina will get her way regardless," Jiraiya said with a confidence that made him frown. Even if you don't return today, there is no doubt in my mind the first thing she is going to do when Minato and Tsukumo return is to go and speak to your father." At that Kakashi scowled. It's not her place. Ignoring the man's ramblings, he gritted out, "I'm fine on my own." Upon hearing the words, Jiraiya suddenly stopped. With a speculative eye he stared down at the 5-year-old for a moment before shaking his head. "Say that again with a little more conviction and maybe I'll start believing you," the famed Toad Sennin snorted. "I am," he persisted with clenched fists. "You know Kushina lost her parents when she was very young," Jiraiya began to say, and though he wanted nothing more to demand what this had to do with him, he didn't. For some reason he found himself remaining quiet. "Not long after she was sent here by her relatives. She was a lot like you in that she had caretakers who would see to her needs, but beyond making sure she was clothed and fed, none of them really bothered her. Due to her boisterous nature and the fact she was considered an outsider by many of the other kids, she didn't have very many friends when she first started at the academy. She was by herself a lot in the beginning. It made her a very lonely child growing up. I guess she wants to try and save you from the same loneliness she went through. I have my father. I'm not alone," he argued, unable to see the correlation between the meddling woman and himself. "He may have lost his mother, but he wasn't an orphan. Being alone and being lonely are two very different things," Jiraiya replied knowingly. "You can be surrounded by 100 people and yet still feel lonely." Unable to refute that, Kakashi lowered his eyes. Scared if he faced the man that everything would somehow show in his gaze. The times he would let dinner get cold hoping to share it with his father. The nights he would fall asleep waiting for his father to come home. The days he would spend in the training grounds trying to get stronger so he could start going on missions, so he could get strong enough to accompany his father on missions. No one is trying to say your father doesn't love you or that he's not doing the best he can for you, Jiraiya tried to assure him. I'm sure Tsukumo doesn't even know your caretaker leaves you alone so often. Considering who he is, I'm certain your father made arrangements with your caretaker to stay with you at night as well. At Kakashi's confusion over why he would need anyone around so often, Jiraiya gave him a deadpan look. Aside from being only 5 years old, you're the son of Konoha's White Fang. There isn't a village in all the elemental nations that wouldn't just love to get their hands on you. In spite of being more intelligent than other children, he was still naive in many ways. It was this naivety that made him voice his belief, they can't get me while I'm in the village. You would think that, wouldn't you? Jiraiya seems to muse to himself before revealing, well, it didn't stop Akumon from infiltrating the village and nearly taking Kushina over the border. Startled by the revelation, Kakashi raised his eyes to meet the dead serious stare of the Toad Sennin. If it weren't for Minato, Kushina certainly wouldn't be here right now, he added. And that's why when Kushina goes to your father with her concerns, there is no doubt in my mind you will be spending a lot of time with the Uzumaki women from here on in. Coupled with the fact Kushina is a seasoned Junin in her own right, there is no way Tsukumo would turn down such an offer. Better just swallow your pride and get used to it. As much as he loathed to admit it, it didn't take a genius to figure out the man was right. Defeated, he let out a deep sigh. Hey, look on the bright side, kid. If Kushina and hell, even Minato, are any indication, then Naruto is going to grow into one hell of a looker, was what Jiraiya saw fit to console him with, a hand resting on his chin as if in deep thought. A lascivious grin lit up his face as he turned to the 5-year-old with a sly look. Best to get a line in early. Something tells me if you don't, you're going to be beating them back with a stick just for the chance to get her attention the moment she reaches puberty. For a moment there was nothing but silence. You do realize that is your 1-year goddaughter you are talking about, right? Kakashi asked him carefully, seriously reconsidering his opinion on whether or not Jiraiya was that kind of a pervert. A pause. Then, aren't you supposed to be warning me off? Well, considering I'm one of the strongest ninja in the village and know someone who could keep you alive and lucid while I make you experience the greatest pain known to men all over the elemental nations, I'm pretty sure that's completely unnecessary," was his cheery reply. At that, Kakashi blinked and asked, "You're talking about?" "Yup," the Sannin interrupted with great relish. Blinking slowly, he took a step away from him and murmured, "Okay, just making sure." As Konoha's White Fang, Tsukumo Hitaki was more than just a hero to the village. To all the nations that would love nothing more than to see Konohagakure laid to ruins, he was a constant reminder of the kind of strength that they were capable of, the strength they once held and still continue to hold even now, years since the last war. While this meant his last few missions had been more or less nothing but a grand show of posturing, if it meant their enemies thought twice before attacking any citizen of Konoha, he would gladly do as many of them as needed. Although they were currently at peace with the murmurings of Iwagakure making a move towards Kusagakure and of the other nations looking to use the current climate to gain an advantage over their neighbors, it was a peace that was precariously close to breaking. Even if it was all just rumors, sometimes that was all that was needed to ignite the whole situation. After surviving one war, he had hoped he would never have to see another. Yet as the skirmishes along the border continued to increase, he knew it would only be a matter of time before the fighting intensified, before it began to spread beyond these small bouts. With a sigh, Tsukumo allowed his gaze to drift towards the sight of his son. Watching as he determinedly went through his katas, he couldn't help but frown. Upon his return home from one of his longer missions, the last thing he expected was to discover that Kakashi had all but been living alone while he was away. That while he was off serving the village, the people to whom he had trusted the care of his 5-year-old boy had seen fit to treat his son like some unwanted pet they only needed to feed 3 times a day. It was no wonder Kakashi was so fiercely independent. Although he knew his boy was smart, he hadn't expected him to advance so quickly. Only a few months in, and not only has he been elevated to the graduating class in the academy, but he had also quickly managed to beat out all of his older classmates to become the top of the class. Though he was proud of him for everything he has achieved, Tsukumo couldn't help but wish for him to just remain a child a little longer. With things progressing as they were, there was no doubt in his mind this would be a war he wouldn't be able to keep Kakashi out of, but even so, the last thing he wanted was for his son to suffer the same horrors he had faced. At least not at such a young age. "That's enough, Kakashi," he called out. "But his son began to protest, arms still held out in a well-practiced stance. "Kushina has kindly invited us to dinner, and I don't know about you, son, but I'll rather not risk her wrath by being late," Tsukumo saw fit to remind him, unable to help but smile when Kakashi immediately stopped what he was doing and with as much dignity as he could muster gave him a cool nod before all but rushing inside. The moment his son was gone, he allowed himself to let out the light laugh that was bubbling within. In the short time they had gotten to know Kushina, both the Hitaki men have quickly learned to possess a healthy fear of the woman's temper. While his last mission has instilled in him a great respect for Minato Namikaze as not only a powerful ninja but also a man he would willingly follow to the depths of hell and back, the respect he amassed only skyrocketed upon meeting his wife. It took a brave soul to tear into Konoha's White Fang, and though some expected him to react in anger, Tsukumo was thankful to know that there was someone out there looking out for his son. Someone not cowed by his reputation and who was willing to point out his failings. While he hadn't known of the neglect, it was his job as a father to find out. Yet it took a stranger to take him to task when a simple talk with his son would have told him all he needed to know. The blasé way in which Kakashi spoke of being able to look after himself, of doing nothing but train and not wanting to be a burden to him, nearly broke his heart. So when Kushina offered to become his son's guardian whenever he was away, he more than readily took her up on the offer. The fact she had a cute little daughter who somehow made his son act more and more like the 5-year-old he was every time he was around her just made the decision all that much easier. Feeling lighter than he has in years, Tsukumo made his way inside. After all, his son wasn't the only one who needed to get ready. XXX. Later that evening, after a satisfying dinner coupled with the amusement of little Naruto once again being foiled in her endless attempts to get a glimpse of Kakashi's unmasked face, Tsukumo found himself sharing a drink with Minato while Kushina carefully explained the basics of Fuinjutsu to his clearly captivated son. So engrossed were they that neither noticed Naruto toddling off, using her newfound ability to walk in order to find another source of entertainment. Not long after, upon feeling a tug on the leg of his pants, he looked down to find big blue eyes staring up at him, lips pursed into a cute pout as she held her arms up to him in silent command. Unable to resist, he carefully picked her up, allowing her to settle in his lap even as her father seemed to sulk at the not-so-subtle slight. Having spent some time in each other's company since Kakashi became somewhat of a fixture in the Namikaze household, he had become fast friends with Minato. In doing so, he quickly learnt that when it came to his young daughter, the man was an absolute pushover. More so than he was with his wife. All it took was a single look and the powerful Junin before him was instantly reduced to mere putty in her hands. "I guess she's still mad at you for distracting her." When Kakashi took off his mask to eat, Tsukumo couldn't help but tease. With a look so gloomy he could almost see the rain clouds hovering above the other man's head, Minato grumbled, "Not like there's anything special to see." Unable to help himself, Tsukumo gently brought Naruto up to a stand on his lap, so that her little sandaled feet rested on his thigh, and turned her to face her father. Supporting her small body on the uneasy perch with a firm grip on her hips, he saw fit to inform him, "You know, Minato, girls are known to mature faster than boys. Give it a few years and I'm sure she'd be chasing my Kakashi for more than just a glimpse of his face. Isn't that right, Naruto-chan?" At that, Naruto blinked at him with drawn brows, tilting her head to the side in confusion before removing the hand she was gnawing on from her teething mouth, and while giving him a solemn nod murmured, "Stupid Kashi." While it was far from what he was aiming for, it more than did the trick. Thank goodness for Naruto's one-track mind. Though he was able to easily dismiss her obsession with unmasking his son for what it truly was, an innocent childish curiosity that would eventually run its course, he knew the new father was already seeing premature visions of raging teenage hormones and all the things that came with it. Although it was not something he was completely immune to when it came to his son, he had other more pressing concerns. However, that did not stop him from occasionally goading the younger man. True to his prediction, with a truly horrified look on his face, Minato all but snatched his daughter from his arms. Rather than alarming her, the sudden action instead only served to elicit an excited giggle from the tiny toddler as she was hastily wrapped in her father's arms. "Ah, Daddy," Naruto squealed happily, her earlier ire quickly forgotten at the sudden attention. In response to the display, Tsukumo laughed loudly at the other man's expense. Unlike his wife, who got excited at just the idea of Naruto gaining a boyfriend and was happily playing matchmaker left and right, Minato was the very polar opposite. If it were up to his younger friend, Tsukumo was sure she would be locked away and not be able to associate with any form of male life until she was old and gray. "No offense, Tsukumo. Kakashi is great and all," Minato began as he gave his smiling daughter a loving look. "But I would be happy if she could just remain a carefree child for as long as possible." "I know how you feel," he commiserated, and with a weary sigh told him, "Kakashi is set on taking the genin test next week." "That soon?" Minato frowned as he set Naruto down on his lap. "There is no way he isn't going to pass," Tsukumo confessed, noticing the little blonde head shifting between them. In spite of her age, there was no doubt in his mind that she was taking in everything they were saying. "Kakashi is strong, he's talented and extremely smart. I've never seen anyone more capable and ready. He is going to be fine, Tsukumo," Minato assured him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You're right. I know you're right," he sighed. Even though he knew just how smart and capable his boy was, it still did little to put his mind at ease, especially with what was coming. The situation might not have reached the boiling point yet, but it wasn't a matter of if, it was only a matter of when. War was coming, and the last thing he wanted was for Kakashi to get caught in the middle of it. Whether capable or not, his son was still only a child. And while any direct interference from him would make Kakashi think he did not believe in him, that did not mean he couldn't look out for his boy in another way. Eyeing the man before him speculatively, he asked, "Have you ever considered taking on a genin team?" Clearly surprised by the question, Minato frowned. No doubt already surmising where he was going with this, he merely stated, "You want me to be Kakashi's sensei? Apart from being one of the strongest ninjas in the village, I trust you to keep him safe. Not because I am your friend or even because you have come to care for him, but simply because that is who you are. With you as his sensei, there is no doubt in my mind that not only will my son flourish but so will his teammates. You will give him the best chance of survival out there because you will treat them fairly, make them a team," Tsukumo replied truthfully. He may not have known him long, but what he knew of him told him everything he needed to know about the man before him. There was no one I would trust more with the growth and development of my son. At that, Minato stared down at his little girl. Although he couldn't begin to possibly guess what was going through the other man's mind, considering they had only just been lamenting over how fast their children were growing up, he could only imagine that he was thinking about what he would do if the situation were reversed. If it were his daughter that was about to be thrust right into the path of an oncoming war. Gently bringing up a hand, he brushed an unruly bang of spiky blonde hair away before leaning down to place a kiss on her scarred cheek. He smiled softly down at her for a moment, then lifting his gaze to meet Tsukumo's dark eyes, admitted, "Truth be told, I was already going to be testing a team of academy graduates next week. There was every chance I would have been assigned to Kakashi's team anyway." "So you will take his team?" Tsukumo needed to know. While in the end the teams were decided and assigned by the academy teachers with the approval of Hokage, it wasn't at all unheard of for some of the prospective instructors to make requests. Though there was no guarantee they would get their pick, in this case there was no way Minato wouldn't get Kakashi. As Konoha's White Fang, Tsukumo rarely used his influence for anything, but for his son he will make sure of this. In response, Minato gave a nod before warning, "But only if he passes my test. I'm not going to give either him or his teammates an easy pass if they are not ready." Releasing the breath he hadn't known he was holding, Tsukumo gave Minato a grateful smile. His answer only serves to reaffirm what he already knew. Minato would be a tough but fair teacher, and that was exactly what his son needed. With a smile he replied, "Of course." At that, Naruto saw fit to turn around to grab at her father's shirt, using the leverage to pull herself up. Not wanting the little girl to fall, her father steadied her as she stood on his lap, tiny feet finding purchase on either side of his thighs as she met his blue-eyed gaze with a wide look. "Daddy Kashi-sensei," she chirped, the words coming out as if she were merely stating a known fact. "Not yet, sweetheart," Minato replied with a smile. At that she pouted and, not at all deterred, demanded, "Soon." If he had any doubts about his decision before, Tsukumo was certain Minato was rid of them now. Even if only for the fact that the weight of his daughter's disappointment would be too hard for the man to bear. With a smile he replied, "Yeah. I guess so. Good daddy," he heard Naruto say, patting her father on the chest a few times with a satisfied grin before maneuvering herself back down to sit on his lap. The moment she was comfortably seated on her own human throne, she curled her hand into a fist and began gnawing on her knuckles once more. With that, Tsukumo threw his head back and let out a full-bellied laugh. While he had no idea what the future may bring, he knew one thing. If things continued the way they were, his son was going to be in for a hell of a time. That girl was going to be trouble when she grew up. XXX. A week later. "Congratulations, Kakashi-kun." With a smile, Kakashi accepted his Konoha protector from his examiner and tied it around his forehead. The moment he was dismissed, he made his way back to the classroom, ignoring all the others as he returned to his seat. In spite of his outward show of composure, inside he was vibrating with barely contained excitement. When the last of the year's prospects were tested and they were finally all allowed to go after being informed to return in 3 days for team assignment, he slowly followed the sea of students out. Rather than heading straight to his favorite training grounds like he usually would, he allowed himself to linger at the gates. Despite his protests, Kushina had been adamant they celebrate his graduation, and in doing so had given him strict instructions to wait for her to pick him up. Never mind the fact he was more than capable of finding his own way. "Kakashi-kun," he heard a voice call, the sound of which made him turn to the source. Upon doing so, he was greeted by the sight of a vaguely familiar girl. With a hand to her chest, she came to a halting stop before him, her breaths coming out in slightly labored puffs even as she smiled brightly at him. Sporting chin-length brown hair, with brown eyes and 2 purple rectangular marks on either side of her cheeks, it took him a moment to place her, but he finally came to recognize her as one of his original classmates. "I can't believe I caught up with you. You're usually gone before any of us can even get out of class, so I didn't think you would still be here," she blurted out excitedly, only to hastily close her mouth with a slight blush once she realized she was rambling. Somewhat sheepishly she said by way of explanation, "Sorry, it's just we were told you were taking the test today and a lot of us wanted to see how you went." Having said that, her eyes quickly darted to the site of his forehead protector before returning to meet him with a genuine smile. "Congratulations, Kakashi-kun. We knew you could do it." Not quite sure how to react, Kakashi stared at her for a moment. It wasn't until she began shifting uncomfortably that he realized he had yet to respond. Just as he was about to express his thanks, he was interrupted by the appearance of yet another familiar face. "Rin-chan, hey Rin-chan, you forgot your book." Whether it was because he was purposely being ignored or simply because he hadn't been noticed, the newcomer didn't even spare him a glance as he rushed up to the brown-haired girl. Unlike the girl, however, he immediately recognized who it was that was before him. It was the Uchiha boy, the one who always wore goggles and never failed to glare Kakashi's way when they were in the same class. "Ah, thank you Obito-kun," the girl, Rin, told him gratefully as she accepted the offered book with a kind smile. As she did so, her gaze flickered over to Kakashi, in turn causing the Uchiha to follow her gaze around to him. The instant their eyes met, the other boy's expression visibly soured. "You remember Kakashi-kun, right? I was just congratulating him on making genin." Far from happy at the mention of his advancement, Obito frowned, but in spite of his obvious ire, the boy still offered a grunt of "congratulations." With a slight nod, Kakashi murmured, "Thank you." It was then he felt it. Ever since he had been spending the time his father was away at the Namikaze household, the little blonde girl has made it a mission to try and sneak up on him. At times popping out at him from the most ridiculous of places, sometimes even from alarmingly high places. Often it was only his quick reflexes that prevented her from getting injured. As a result, he had begun to develop a sort of sixth sense when it came to the tiny hellion. Like the feeling he was getting at the moment, it came in the form of the prickling feel that told him he was about to be set upon by an overly excitable bundle of orange. "Kashi!" Naruto cried happily, only to have her cheerful laughter be abruptly cut off by a yelp of surprise. Turning around just in time to see her stumble, Kakashi was just about to act when someone beat him to it. Before she could hit the ground, there was a sudden rush of green, the speed of which resulted in a light trailing of dust to form in its wake. At the sight, he put an immediate halt to his own movements, the fear of hurting her in the confusion overcoming his own overwhelming sense to go to her. Once the dust settled, it was to reveal Naruto safely cradled in the arms of a dark-haired boy with a slightly long bowl haircut and a green jumpsuit adorning his slim frame. "Yosh, I got her," the boy exclaimed, breaking into a grin so wide he could have sworn he saw a sparkle. "What the hell? Where did he come from?" The Uchiha boy exclaimed his surprise while the girl Rin merely stared in her shock. Ignoring them all, Kakashi strode over to the pair. With a simple nod of gratitude he quickly relieved the strange boy of his newly acquired burden in order to gently set her down on her feet. With that he kneeled in front of her and allowed his eyes to roam over her tiny form. Upon determining that she was fine he finally came to notice what she was wearing. In place of the simple t-shirt and shorts she seemed to favor, Naruto was dressed in a pretty sundress complete with a bow in her spiky blonde hair and matching sandals. It was no doubt an outfit her mother had forced her to wear for his graduation celebration. Unable to help the smile to curve at his lips at the sight of her, he gave her cheek a soft pinch, the action causing her to puff up her cheeks in mild affront and whine, "Kashi mean. Not when you deserve it," he returned, giving her another pinch just to see her puff her cheeks again. Wiping the smile off his face he gave her a stern look and said, "How many times have you been told not to run like that?" In spite of the guilty expression she pursed her lips and crossed her arms stubbornly in response to his light reprimand. Had he been anyone else there was no way he would have been able to resist letting out a squeal of "cute" at the sight, especially with her dressed the way she was. It was just as well he was made of sterner stuff. As it was her cute show of annoyance only distracted him enough to miss what the strange newcomer had just said to him. Did you say something?" he questioned as he tilted his head to the boy clad in green with a frown. Unsure of what was happening, Kakashi could only watch as the strange boy erupted into a loud cry of, "Arg, what is this attitude? So hip and cool I can't stand it." Blinking slowly, Kakashi gave the boy a confused stare. Not really caring to find out what that was all about, he figured it best to just ignore the boy for now and instead returned his attention to Naruto. Frowning at her he asked, "Where is your mother?" "Home," the little girl chirped. At that his frown deepened. Wondering how she got here if not with her mother. Having witnessed Kushina use her chakra chains in order to stop her daughter from running off more times than he could count, he knew better than anyone that there was no way she would let Naruto run off like this. Her father on the other hand would have used that technique of his in order to appear at her side the moment he even suspected of having lost her. And since Jiraiya was currently away he couldn't think of anyone else that could have brought her so close to the academy. "Who's looking after you today, Naruto?" "That would be me," came a sheepish voice, the sound of which instantly had Kakashi snapping his head up with a wide look of disbelief. I really hadn't thought Kushina and Minato were serious when they said all she needed was a second to disappear. "Father," Kakashi found himself whispering. "I thought you were on a mission." "I am," his father replied. His gaze flickered over to Naruto. "It just so happens that my current mission requires me to remain in the village until the parents of a certain little munchkin return from their mission." In response Kakashi frowned. "Minato and Kushina are leaving tomorrow," was the simple explanation. "I've been assigned as Naruto's official bodyguard until they return." The explanation only caused his frown to deepen as he couldn't help but wonder why Naruto warranted such a high-ranking ninja just to look after her. No doubt sensing his confusion his father laughed and explained, "You might not know this, son, but on the days when Kushina can't find anyone to look after her, Naruto-chan can be found in the Hokage's office, sitting on the Sandame's lap as he assigns missions." In spite of all the time he had spent with Naruto and her mother he did not know that. The Hokage himself is extremely fond of our little Naruto-chan. She's like a granddaughter to him, and after what happened to Kushina, nobody is taking any chances when it comes to her safety. It made sense, yet at the same time Kakashi couldn't help but feel there was more to it. However, never one to look a gift horse in the mouth, he let go of his suspicions for the moment in order to ask, "How long?" "About 2 or 3 days. Naruto will be staying with us in the meanwhile, and I don't think she'll mind if I take the opportunity to show you a few tricks you might need now that you are a genin," his father replied, much to his pleasure. Then bending down he reached out to gently tap the plate of his forehead protector and gifting him with a warm smile said, "Congratulations Kakashi. You can't imagine how proud I am of you." At that Kakashi ducked his head with a flush of pride. "Yay Kashi," Naruto cheerfully cried, darting forward to wrap her tiny arms around him. All but jumping onto him where he knelt. The suddenness of her actions and the fact he chose to catch her rather than risk her harm to right himself caused him to lose his balance. As he fell back to land unceremoniously on his behind, he turned to his father with a beseeching look, trying his hardest to keep a hold of her as the cheeky blonde practically bounced in his arms in her excitement. Rather than move to help him up or even attempt to remove Naruto from atop of him, his father merely laughed at his predicament. Instead, meeting Kakashi's annoyed gaze with one filled with amusement. "Yosh!" the strange boy in green shouted, his eyes shining as he pumped a fist in the air. "What a beautiful display of youth!" At the loud shout, his father turned his attention to the group standing behind Kakashi and Naruto. In an instant his eyes lit up at the sight of them. "Ah, you must be Kakashi's friends," his father wrongly concluded upon noticing the ragtag gathering assembled before him. "My apologies for not introducing myself sooner. I'm Tsukumo Hatake, Kakashi's father." Before he could correct the assumption, the girl Rin bowed and nervously introduced herself with, "My name is Rin Nohara. It's nice to meet you, sir." "Yosh, I guess it's my turn," the boy in green announced. That said, he waved his arm dramatically to hold his hand out to them with a thumbs up, grinning so widely he could have sworn he heard a ping to accompany the teeth sparkle. If that wasn't enough, as if on cue a breeze decided to pass by, blowing a shower of leaves behind the strange boy to the bafflement of all involved before he broke the spell by all but shouting, "I am Konoha's sublime green beast of prey, the youthful guy Maida at your service." Still reeling at the eccentric display, the remaining boy blinked blankly for a moment. Then, upon realizing everyone was waiting for him, he sheepishly scratched the back of his head and said, "I'm Obito Uchiha." Nice to meet you, sir." Suddenly Naruto shuffled in his arms, her foot making contact with his stomach, enough to knock the breath out of him, as she scrambled up to peer over his shoulder. Happily she yelled, "Bito! Naruto-chan!" he heard the Uchiha boy exclaim in reply. Tilting his head back with a frown, he found the other boy taking a step forward, a wide grin spread across his face as he leaned down to give the bubbly toddler a pat on the head. It took all he had not to jerk her away from the Uchiha. "It's been a while since Naruto-chan. Sorry I haven't been visiting. I got a bit busy when I started the academy," the boy apologized with a sheepish laugh. "Blah," Naruto responded, poking out her tongue at him to show she was less than impressed. He smiled at that. "Ah, don't be like that, Naruto-chan," the Uchiha boy all but begged. "I'm sure she won't be mad long, Obito-kun," his father assured the boy as he finally saw fit to lift the pouting toddler off him. With as much dignity as he could muster, Kakashi got to his feet. Wanting nothing more than to leave, he suggested, "We should get going, father. I am sure Kushina-san is wondering where we are." As he settled Naruto on his hip, his father took a moment to regard his former classmates. Whatever he found must have been to his satisfaction, because he saw fit to give them an encouraging smile. "If you're not doing anything this afternoon, I was just wondering if you all would like to join us," his father invited. "Naruto's mother is preparing a feast in order to celebrate Kakashi's graduation, and I'm sure we have more than enough for a few of Kakashi's friends." At the thought of having to share his father and the Namakazes with these strangers, he frowned. Finally having had enough, Kakashi coolly stated, "They're not my friends." Although he only spoke the truth, he couldn't help but regret the words at the hurt look that immediately appeared on Rin's face. It seemed he wasn't the only one to notice if the glare on Obito's and the frowns on both Guy and his father's face was any indication. Even Naruto was looking at him like he had taken her mother's beloved ramen away from her. "I mean, we don't know each other well enough to be friends," he amended. At the feel of his father's hand on his shoulder, Kakashi tilted his head back to be greeted by a warm smile. "Well then, don't you think it's time we fix that?" his father urged gently. "These are your future comrades after all." Recognizing the look in his father's eyes, the look that told him there was no way he was going to get out of this unless he wanted to incur his father's disappointment, Kakashi let out a sigh and turned to the trio standing before him and asked, "Would you like to join us?" "Of course, I will be delighted to be part of such a youthful gathering," Guy immediately agreed with a thumbs up. "I would love to," Rin replied, her earlier hurt disappearing to make way for a warm smile. The Uchiha on the other hand was far from forgiving, yet in spite of the glare he was still determined to throw Kakashi's way. Upon seeing the smile on Rin's face, his expression softened and with some reluctance he muttered, "I suppose I have nothing better to do." "It's decided then," his father happily announced. "Party!" Naruto yelled her approval from her perch on his father's hip. Outnumbered, Kakashi tried his best not to sulk as they headed home with the 3 new additions. As Rin smiled, Obito continued to glare and Guy jumped along with what seemed like an endless abundance of energy, the likes of which he never thought he'd see in anybody else other than Naruto. Kakashi sighed. At least he had the next few days to look forward to. In spite of the fact he would be sharing his father with Naruto, he found he didn't mind all that much. As if sensing his thoughts, she peeked at him from over his father's shoulder, her bright eyes shining as she gifted him with a smile. One that he couldn't help but return with a visible eye smile of his own. XXX. When they arrived at the small compound he shared with his father, the group was greeted to the sight of a mouth-watering feast along with Naruto's smiling parents, who upon seeing his forehead protector offered their congratulations and the gift of a high-quality kunai set. Not to be outdone, his father produced a short sword along with the promise to teach him how to incorporate it into his fighting style. Though thankful, he couldn't help but be embarrassed by the attention, especially when Kushina decided to bring out the baby pictures she found. By that time they noticed the 3 others tagging along. Kakashi were more than glad for the diversion they provided. It seemed the Namikaze family were familiar with the Uchiha boy, who as it turned out was close enough to Naruto's godmother to consider her his auntie. When he wasn't scowling at him, Obito was nearly as bright and bubbly as Naruto herself, easily commanding the attention of all those around him. It was for this reason Kakashi found himself unable to hate the boy even if he found the glares annoying. As the evening wore on, he found he didn't mind the company of his former classmates. Rin was a kind girl who was determined to become a good ninja and wasn't afraid to work hard for it. In spite of his eccentricities, Guy was a hard worker who had developed his speed and taijutsu to a level that rivaled his own. In fact, he was quick to learn when they decided to indulge in a friendly spar. However, despite his skills due to his difficulties in mastering the academy jutsus, he was considered a loser by most of his classmates. Rather than demotivating him, however, it instead made him all the more determined to work harder to get them right. As someone who never experienced such difficulties, Kakashi couldn't help but admire his determination. By the time the others left for home, Kakashi found himself somehow promising to meet for the occasional spar and even for a friendly catch-up. "We must get going as well," Minato announced long after the departure of the other children. At that, Kushina frowned, her violet eyes turning to the sleepy blonde in her arms worriedly. Sharing a quick look with her husband, she returned her gaze to her daughter. Almost reverently she placed a gentle kiss on her forehead before lifting her eyes up to meet his father's gaze with a fierce look. "Don't forget to make her eat her vegetables and make sure you place Gama-chan next to her when she sleeps in." "You already gave him the list, Kushina. I'm sure Sakuma will follow it to the letter," her husband gently assured. In spite of the assurance of the fearsome woman, some of the greatest men in the village cringe in fear, the list of which included his own father, seemed to only get more worried. "I know," she replied in a soft voice. This is the first time." With those words it suddenly hit Kakashi. This was her first mission since Naruto's birth, the first time she would be away from her daughter. She will be fine, Kushina, Minato once again assured. He got up and stopped just behind her and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. And so will we. Of course we are, Minato easily agreed, a smile on his life as he gazed lovingly at his wife and daughter. As Naruto let out a sleepy yawn, exhausted after the day's excitement, his father stood up and offered, "I've set up Kakashi's old nursery for her if you would like to put her to bed before you both go. I know you have an early start tomorrow." "Thank you Tsukumo," Minato gratefully replied as both he and his wife stood up. From where he sat at the table, Kakashi watched as his father led the young family down the halls. When his father returned without the couple, he worriedly asked, "Are they going to be all right?" At the question, his father ruffled his hair and smiled. With a confidence that did more to assure him than any words could, he answered, "Trust me when I say it would take nothing short of an army to bring those two down. I've seen Minato on the field and he is nothing short of amazing. There is a reason why he is called a genius. Give him a few more years and I have no doubt he will surpass all who came before him." Added to that is Kushina, who is truly a force of nature all on her own. Just like her personality, she is wild, fierce and utterly unpredictable, making her extremely dangerous on field. Trust me when I say there is no need to worry Kakashi. Apart from being great ninjas, they have something very precious to them to live for, and sometimes that is all you need out there when the odds are stacked against you. Any response he might have had immediately died on his lips as Minato and Kushina chose that moment to return. "She's asleep," Kushina informed them with a deep steadying breath. Although he would be the first to admit he wasn't all pleased with her in the beginning, since she became his caretaker he has grown very fond of her. It was this fondness that made him step forward and say in all earnestness, "I promise I will look after Naruto and protect her." Upon hearing his words, Kushina smiled warmly at him. Without warning, she leant down to place a kiss on his forehead, the action causing his cheeks to turn a violent shade of red that he was sure traveled further than his mask. As she pulled away, her smile widened. "Then I'll trust the task to you, Kakashi-kun." Aye, he spluttered, embarrassed. While his father laughed, Minato decided to come to his rescue by saying, "We better head off. Thank you again for agreeing to this, Tsukumo. Having her with you and Kakashi has done more to put our mind at ease than anything else." "No thanks necessary, my friend," his father replied. "After all you both have done for Kakashi, this is nothing in comparison. I wish you both a safe trip." After saying their goodbyes to the couple, Kakashi stood by his father's side as they disappeared into the night. While he was happy to be able to spend a few days with his father, he couldn't help but feel bad it only came about at the expense of Naruto and her parents. Although Kushina may have thought he was only making a mere child's promise, one he would likely soon forget, for Kakashi it was a promise he was determined to keep. XXX. Later that night, Kakashi awoke to the sound of a familiar cry. Suddenly alert, the 5-year-old hastily stumbled out of bed. Without even bothering with the lights, he made his way toward the old nursery next to his room and pushed the door open. Once he did, he was treated to the sight of a small blonde head peeking out from a mass of blankets. "Naruto-chan," he called out, only to receive a whimper in response. Not needing any further prompt, he walked into the room and sat down on the side of the big girl bed she had been so excited to be sleeping in earlier. Carefully he reached out a hand to her, frowning when she instantly recoiled from his touch. "Naruto-chan," he tried again uncertainly. In all the time he has known her, he had never known her to react in such a way. "Mommy, Daddy, gone," she whimpered. "Naruto alone. They are just on a mission to Naruto-chan. They will be back soon." "No. Naruto alone," she sniffled heartbrokenly. She wiped her eyes with a tiny hand and continued to cry. "No one. Just bad eyes. Mean people. Stare. Call Naruto bad. Demon. No play. No fwen. Lone. Upon realizing she must have had a nightmare, Kakashi floundered for a moment. Unsure of what to do, he was just about to go get his father when a small hand gripped his shirt. "No, Kashi. No go," Naruto cried, scrambling out of her warm cocoon of blankets to wrap her arms around him tightly. Like she was afraid the moment she even loosened her hold he would disappear. As she continued to cry, Kakashi wrapped his arms around her and murmured, "I'm not going anywhere, Naruto-chan. Promise?" she asked in between sobs. "Promise," was his resolute reply. Something in his voice must have convinced her, because her cries slowly began to subside, until they were reduced to nothing more than the occasional hiccup. Unwilling to leave her while she was still so upset, Kakashi remained where he was, holding her close even as her breathing eventually began to even out and his own eyes began to close. Before he realized it, Kakashi closed his eyes completely. To Tsukumo's immense relief, when the morning came, Naruto was already back to her normal happy, cheeky self. Having walked in just in time to divert the toddler's attention away from Kakashi unmasking his face, he couldn't help but let out an amused laugh at the disgruntled look she immediately threw his way, especially when she turned back to discover his son finished with his meal and already cleaning up. Despite the fact Kakashi had clearly forgotten his mask the other night, it seemed it had been too dark for little Naruto to see. It wasn't until they made their way through the village that he noticed it. Noticed how her smile would be just that tad bit brighter even as her eyes seemed to dim with a cautiousness that was never there before. Whatever it was she saw, it was enough to cause her to walk that little bit closer and grip his hand just that little bit tighter. As he looked around to try and find the source of her unease, he could find nothing but a parade of smiling faces. Although he did not understand it, Tsukumo kept a firm hold on her hand, not letting go until they finally found their way to his old team's training spot, a spot he knew Kakashi had taken to coming to after class nearly every day. True to his word, the second they got there, Tsukumo took out his blade, and leaving a shadow clone to entertain Naruto in the meanwhile, spent the morning teaching Kakashi how to use his new sword. As lunchtime approached, he was just in the middle of testing his son with a quick spar before they took a break when he suddenly found himself freezing in the middle of a block with wide eyes. The moment of distraction caused him to bring his blade up a second too late. Enough to allow Kakashi's blade to slip past his guard and dig shallowly into his unprotected arm. "Father!" Kakashi let out a cry of alarm, immediately falling back with wide eyes at the sight of his bleeding arm. "Unbelievable," was all he said before he turned around to where his clone was before it dispersed itself. Just like the last memory to be transferred to him, there standing on the side of the training field well within his view with a smiling copy of herself standing next to her was Naruto. As he stared at her and saw the unmistakable proof of Minato's genius wrapped up in Kushina's personality, Tsukumo wasn't sure whether he should be impressed or extremely scared. Before he could ponder on it for too long, Kakashi appeared by his side. Clearly taken aback by the sight, his son instantly narrowed his eyes. No doubt coming to the conclusion they were dealing with an impostor, he fell back into a familiar stance. Had Tsukumo not had the memories of his clone to tell him exactly what happened, he would have thought the same thing. "Unka, Kashi looky, nother me. Datbayo," one of the Narutos happily exclaimed. In spite of the situation, Tsukumo couldn't help but notice the verbal tick Naruto seemed to have picked up. Apart from the last few syllables, it was nearly the exact same one her mother was prone to bursting out with whenever she was overexcited. A trait she had wished her daughter would not pick up. Although he guessed this was Naruto's way of coping with the separation, Kushina was not going to be happy when she found out. He sighed. By the way things were progressing, he wasn't too sure he was going to survive this mission. As he stared down at the two Narutos glaring at each other, he took little comfort in the fact that at least some of her wrath would be well deserved. "No," the other Naruto denied hotly. "You bother me. I'm real." "Nah, fake," the first Naruto retorted. "Lie, you fake," the second Naruto cried, shaking her fist at the first one. Feeling a headache coming on and knowing he needed to get a hold of the situation, Tsukumo began, "Okay Naruto." "Yes Unka," both saw fit to chirp. Once they realized they had spoken at the same time, the Narutos sent an identical glare each other's way. It would have been extremely cute if the whole situation didn't have him so close to heart palpitations. There was a reason the cage bunshin was a forbidden technique. It was a technique that not only required a lot of chakra to perform but also one that can put a lot of stress on the user when they get the memories of their dispelled clone. If Naruto had been a year or so older, Tsukumo would not have felt such a reason to fear, but at only 1.5 years old he wasn't so sure if she could deal with the mental backlash, even if it was just the backlash from a single clone. The fact she managed to perform the technique by only seeing him perform it and getting him to show her some hand signs, which he, or to be more precise his clone, saw no harm in showing her, because there was no way she would be able to do anything with them anyway without the proper sequence or ability to apply chakra would be unbelievable if he did not witness it for himself. "I can't tell which one is the imposter," Kakashi stated with a frown, his uncertainty the only reason he had yet to move. "Neither of them are," Tsukumo informed his confused son. "How is that possible? I may have unknowingly shown her the hand signs for the cage bunshin," he admitted with a wince. "Even though I didn't teach her the sequence, she somehow managed to put it together and actually channel enough of her chakra to successfully make a solid clone of herself." At the interest he could clearly see on his son's face at the mention of a solid clone, Tsukumo shook his head. "I'm not teaching you until I'm sure you have enough chakra to perform it," he informed the boy sternly. "This technique drains your chakra like no other. Most ninja can't even produce more than one clone without starting to feel its effects. In the wrong hands it can be extremely dangerous to the user." Alarmed, overcoming his earlier interest, Kakashi instantly returned his gaze to the two feuding blondes before them as he demanded, "Is Naruto going to be alright?" "She better be," was Tsukumo's only answer. "No, she's fake," the first Naruto shouted in protest as she pointed to her twin. "No you. Po'o head," the second returned just as heatedly. That apparently was the last straw. With a loud war cry, the first Naruto ran at the second. Not to be outdone, the second Naruto let out a cry of her own before running at the other. Before either Tsukumo or Kakashi could react, the two identical toddlers made contact. In silent horror they watched as the second Naruto suffered a punch to the face from the first, the impact of which instantly sent her sprawling back. The instant she hit the ground she disappeared with a loud pop and a wisp of smoke. Grinning triumphantly, the remaining Naruto raised her fist in the air with a cry of, "Hu Po'o head. Datbeo." Without wasting a second, Tsukumo was immediately by her side, holding her in place as he kneeled in front of her. After a quick inspection showed no visible signs of overexertion or anything that could begin to suggest her chakra was low, he asked her, "Naruto-chan, are you feeling tired or sick? Does your head hurt?" "No Unka," she replied with a grin. "Me no hurt. I won. You see. Pow. Poof." He certain she was okay. Tsukumo couldn't help but look down at the toddler before him in wonder, the same toddler who just performed an A-ranked jutsu many 10 times her age couldn't even think to perform due to its potentially fatal drawbacks without the slightest hint of strain. To say it was amazing would be a gross understatement. It wasn't something that should be possible. Yet it was so easy to forget that Naruto wasn't just any normal little girl. "Am I wrong?" she questioned uncertainly. "No," Tsukumo replied. "If anyone was in the wrong it would be him. While it seemed to have turned out okay, he should have known better. It's not like he didn't have experience with baby geniuses. Especially since Kakashi had well and truly begun walking and talking before Naruto managed her first steps. He should have known better than to show her the hand signs, even if he was certain there was no way she would be able to make sense of any of it or channel her chakra in such a way." He let out a sigh. What was done was done. All he could do was to make sure she didn't hurt herself. He would leave the rest to Kushina and Minato. After all, as a former Jinchuriki, Kushina would know better than anyone what was safe for her daughter. Just promise me that you will never do that again. Not unless you get permission from your mother or father, okay? Naruto agreed, and though he was not sure if she understood the gravity of the promise, she knew what it meant to keep one. Good, he let out a sigh of relief. He gave Naruto a contemplative look before turning to his still bleeding arm with a wince. In comparison to what he was used to, it might have been a paper cut, but like a paper cut, just because it was small didn't mean it didn't sting like hell. Just to be safe, we're going to get someone at the hospital to look over you and get my arm wrapped up while we're at it. At the mention of his arm, Kakashi shrunk back. Hey, none of that now, he immediately said. You executed the attack perfectly, Kakashi. I'm proud of you. It took me a lot longer to even get that much. Now come on, the faster we get to the hospital, the faster we can go and grab something to eat. Gently gathering her into his arms, he settled her against his hip and turned to Kakashi, who had no doubt observed the whole thing. With a frown on his face, he let out another sigh. It was at times like these he couldn't help but wish his son wasn't so smart. Hoping to distract the pair for the moment, he asked, so what do you guys feel like for lunch? Ramen. Naruto instantly yelled. Excited, she turned to his son and exclaimed, Kashi ramen. At the long-suffering sigh his son uttered, Tsukumo knew the battle was already won. Like Minato, his son was becoming quite the pushover when it came to little Naruto. It would make him feel sorry for his boy if he didn't find it so damn amusing. Ramen it is, he announced to the absolute delight of the toddler in his arms. Yay! Ramen! Datbayo! XXX! After spending half the day learning how to use his new sword and the other half undergoing endurance training in the guise of playing ninja with Naruto, Kakashi was well and truly ready to just pass out. Of the two, keeping up with the blonde bundle of energy more than definitely lived up to its name. Not even bothering to remove his mask, he simply collapsed on his bed and closed his eyes. He could have sworn he only closed them for a second, but when he opened his eyes again to the sound of a creak reverberating through the silence of his room, he glanced at his clock to find it was well past midnight. Kashi, he heard a small voice softly call. Lazily he pushed himself up off bed. Forcing his tired limbs to take the few steps it took to get to the door, he opened it and with a yawn looked down. Standing before him clutching her favorite toy, which was a toad and in no way a frog he'd been scolded the first time he made the mistake, tightly to her small trembling body, Naruto stared uncertainly up at him. Stared at him like she was actually scared he was going to turn her away. Like he could actually turn her away. Bad dream? He asked sleepily. Unusually subdued, she silently nodded. Without a word he pulled the door open and stepped aside. When she made no move to come inside, he let out another yawn and said, I'm sure Gamma-chan is getting cold standing out here, especially with a nice warm bed waiting, don't you think, Naruto-chan? Not needing another word, she stumbled inside and all but climbed into his unmade bed. When he fell into the space beside her, he carefully turned onto his side. The moment he did, he found himself staring into her wide eyes. At the lingering fear he could see in them, Kakashi gently stroked her hair. Sleep, Naruto-chan. I'm not going anywhere. It seemed those were the magic words. Snuggling close to him, she closed her eyes. By the time her breathing evened out, he had already closed his own eyes and allowed the exhaustion of the day to take him. XXX. By the time they completed the mission, Kushina was more than ready to return. That was not to say she did not enjoy it. Once she was able to put aside her anxiety concerning leaving Naruto, it was like she never left. For her first time out since Naruto's birth, everything had practically gone off without a hitch. Or at least it had, in her opinion. No matter what Minato said, the explosion was not her fault, and even if it was, it wasn't like it exposed them. In fact, it actually ended up distracting everybody long enough for them to successfully make their escape. Not that they couldn't take them on. Had the mission not required a degree of discretion they would have. Mommy. Daddy. Datbeo. An excited cry greeted them the moment they entered the Hitaki compound. Too excited by the sight of their daughter to really register her newfound verbal tic, Kushina immediately gathered the precious little bundle barreling towards her into her arms, lifting her baby girl up to the gift of a rain of kisses all over face. With a joyful laugh she allowed Minato to take Naruto out of her arms. A smile curving at her lips as she watched her greet him just as enthusiastically. "I hope she wasn't in too much trouble," she said as she turned back to Tsukumo. The second she saw the look in his eyes she found herself suddenly freezing, the smile dying on her lips at their seriousness clear in his gaze. Before she could ask what was wrong he ushered Kakashi forward and pointedly said, "Kakashi, why don't you take Naruto to gather her things?" At the frown to appear on the boy's face it was clear he'd picked up on his father's tone, but rather than question him he stepped forward and as soon as Naruto was set down on her feet once more gently took her hand in his. To their daughter he said, "Come on Naruto-chan, I'll help you pack everything." Completely oblivious to tension in the room, Naruto simply let out a chirp of "K." As their excitable daughter all but dragged the silver-haired boy away, Kushina barely managed to keep herself together. Her mind began racing wildly at all the possibilities. The fears she'd put aside for the sake of the mission returning to her in full force. Never one to beat around the bush. The moment the children left the room, Kushina immediately turned on the white-haired man and let all her mounting anxieties loose. "We were hardly gone for 2 days. Damn it. What the hell could have happened in 2 days? I swear if ever," the voice of reason Minato calmly told her. Kushina stop and let Tsukumo explain. Had it not been for the intensity she could clearly see in his eyes, the presence of which told her he was every bit as worried as she was, Kushina would have turned on him as well. As it was enough to allow her to rein it in, to take a deep breath and remind herself who it was she was talking to. Who it was that stood before her. Instantly deflating, she fell back against her husband, who immediately wrapped his arm around her as she apologized. "I'm sorry." "Think nothing of it, Kushina," Tsukumo kindly told her. "So what happened?" Minato asked, and though she could not see him she could practically hear the frown in his tone. "To be honest, I'm not too sure myself," the man admitted, the words doing absolutely nothing to ease their worry. "The night you both left, Naruto was awakened by a bad dream, or at least that's what I thought it was. After the first night I was certain she would be fine, but it happened again the next, and it was only Kakashi's presence both times that allowed her to go back to sleep." Although outwardly he was a picture of calm, the feeling of Minato's arms tightening around her told a much different story. He didn't need to say a word for her to know what it was he was thinking of. What it was that was worrying him. Since the unexplained events surrounding their daughter's birth, it was the same thing that continually worried her. That there was something they missed. Something that was now hurting their beautiful baby. In an even voice he asked, "What was the dream about?" The way she described it, it sounded like she was dreaming about being a known Jinchuriki, Tsukumo informed them. "For whatever reason in her dreams the both of you were gone. She was alone and from what I could tell the subject of the village's scorn and hate. It could have just been her reacting to having the both of us gone for the first time," Kushina tried to reason. She clenched her fists and tried her hardest to stop her stomach from turning, to stop her head from getting away from her. "That was what I first thought as well," Tsukumo admitted. Had she not said the word demon so clearly, like she's heard it so many times before, I would have just shrugged it off as her imagination getting the better of her. At that, Kushina felt her temper once again flaring. While her own status as the previous Jinchuriki was the worst kept secret in the village, hardly anyone alive had been affected by the last time the beast was free, and her relationship with the late Shadaime's honored wife went a long way to ensuring she was not directly mistreated in any way. Sure, there were some that still regarded her with wariness, but these days they were few and far in between. It was for this reason they allowed everybody to continue thinking she was still the container. Of course, if this had the added benefit of ensuring that the other villages remain wary of engaging a fully grown and trained Jinchuriki, then who were they to change such a convenient misconception? Had word spread of their one-year daughter being the new container of the beast, there was no doubt in either of their minds all anyone would have seen would be an easy target for the taking. So save for a select few, no one knew that the Kyuubi was no longer sealed within her, which only meant the pool of people Naruto could have learned to think of herself in such a way was significantly limited. As if reading her thoughts, Tsukumo pointed out, since every time she has interacted with anybody beyond those who absolutely adore her, one of us or the Hokage has been present, I don't think anybody is to blame for this, Kushina. At those words silence reigned. You think the Kyuubi may have something to do with it? Minato finally gave voice to what they were all thinking and dreading. No, Kushina denied, latching onto her knowledge of seals to quickly put a stamp on the concern threatening to overwhelm her. The only time I was able to make contact with the Kyuubi was whenever my life was in danger and I was forced to use its chakra. Otherwise there was little it could do to me from where it was chained within my subconscious. I know Naruto's seal doesn't work quite the same way, but I went over everything in the last detail of it and I swear there is just no way at all that the beast can influence her like that. Could Naruto have accidentally tapped into its chakra and somehow found herself before the Kyuubi? Tsukumo questioned with a concerned frown. Surprised by the line of questioning, Kushina replied, I've never actively sought out the Kyuubi myself, but if I would have to venture a guess, I would say if she tapped into its chakra and was distressed enough, it is a possibility that Naruto could have stumbled upon the beast even if she wasn't looking for it. As his frown deepened, Kushina could feel hers beginning to form as she realized what it was he was getting at. That's impossible, she declared with a shake of her head. Naruto doesn't even know how to access her own chakra. I don't see how she could. At the decidedly uncomfortable way Tsukumo avoided their gazes, Kushina narrowed her eyes. Before she had the chance to interrogate him further on exactly what it was he knew, Kakashi and Naruto chose that moment to return to the room, the former of which was dutifully carrying Naruto's close to bursting toad backpack while the latter hugged the beloved orange toad Jiraiya gifted her with on her last birthday close to her chest. Naruto-chan, Tsukumo called to their little girl, who upon hearing her name, the little blonde tilted her head up to give him a look of curiosity. Remember the thing you promise me not to do again unless your parents say it's okay. Well, your mommy and daddy would like to see it. Can you show them what you learned? Fake? Naruto asked with a light scowl. Smiling, Tsukumo nodded down at her and said, yes. Your parents would like to see the fake for themselves. She replied easily. Looking down, she frowned at the toy in her arms as if only noticing she held it for the first time. With some reluctance she held the orange toad out to Kakashi, who silently took it with a promise to keep it safe from the fake. That done, she looked down again. This time when she did so, it was to the sight of her small fingers coming together to form a very familiar sign. A sign that was followed by a series of others. Is she? What the? To the shock of all but Tsukumo and his son, she yelled out, Kage Bushin no Jutsu, so clearly it was easy to think she had known the words all her life. The moment they left her mouth, an exact copy of Naruto appeared right beside her from the resulting cloud of smoke. Where did she even learn to do that? Kushina demanded the moment she managed to snap out of her shock-induced stupor. With a sigh, Tsukumo admitted, I may have performed it in front of her once and then helped her with some hand signs without knowing what she wanted them for. In all the time she has known her husband, she would recognize the look on his face anywhere. It was the same look he would get every time he faced a puzzle he had yet to solve. Naruto, can you tell daddy something? At that both of them nodded. Where did you learn to make a copy of yourself, Naruto-chan? Like always, it seemed Minato was already thinking ahead. For Naruto to start experiencing such dreams, dreams alluding to something she should have no idea about. At the same time, she revealed such an advanced skill could be coincidence, but neither of them ever really believed in coincidences. No matter how much they wanted to. Even though they have come to accept the events of Naruto's birth, it didn't mean they had yet stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. Naruto see mommy, Unka do shapes, one of the Narutos answered enthusiastically, clumsily moving her hands together to form more than a few familiar signs. Not to be outdone, the other Naruto added, Icter in head. Do the same. At those words Kushina let out the breath she did not know she was holding. While the dreams may be linked to the Kyuubi, it seemed Naruto's new learned ability was one she achieved all on her own. With a flush she suddenly realized if Naruto learnt the Kage Bunshin from anyone, it was more likely to have been from her. As both an Uzumaki and a former Jinchuriki, she had more than enough chakra to spare, meaning unlike most she could afford to be frivolous in her use of the technique, and she would often rely on the jutsu in order to get all her tasks for the day done while keeping up with her training and keeping a watchful eye on Naruto at the same time. I made sure to get a medic nin to check her afterwards, and they assured me she was perfectly fine. That there were no signs of fatigue, physical or otherwise, the man informed them. In spite of Tsukumo's assurance, it seemed her husband didn't want to take any chances. Naruto, can you do something for daddy? Minato said before kneeling down to the two Narutos before him with a smile. At that both of them nodded. Can you please dispel the copy of Naruto-chan? Fake. The Naruto closest to him asked as she pointed to her copy, who visibly bristled at being called a fake. Smiling, Minato nodded and said, yes, can you please make it go by? Daddy. The other Naruto cried, eyes filling with tears as she denied, not fake. Of course not, he immediately assured. However, in pacifying one he managed to upset the other. Daddy, me fake, the first Naruto accused with watery blue eyes. While her husband lost his usual cool beneath the double threat of two visibly teary Narutos, Kushina stepped forward and addressed both and said, Naruto-chan, I want you to put your hands together like this for me. Wiping their eyes, both the Narutos in front of her did exactly as she demonstrated. Good, she praised with a reassuring smile as they both sniffed. Uncertain how to phrase her next words to make Naruto understand she wanted her to draw on her chakra, she frowned and tried, now I want you to keep your hands like this and do the same thing you do when you make a copy of yourself. Make me glow like mommy. One of the Narutos asked. Realizing her daughter understood, Kushina's smile brightened as she nodded. Yes Naruto, I want you to keep your hands like this, make it glow and say, Kai. K. They both agreed. As soon as the words were spoken, the first Naruto disappeared with a puff of smoke, leaving the remaining Naruto to celebrate her proven realness with a fist bump and a little dance of victory. We really need to teach her that she's making copies. Just so her copies are aware they are copies and don't try to stage a mutiny on her one day, Kushina sighed. If it weren't ridiculous enough that their 1 year was performing a forbidden jutsu, the fact she hadn't even realized what she was doing was creating an exact copy of herself certainly tipped the scale. I think we will be needing to teach her a lot of things, Minato agreed. He ran a hand through his blonde spikes as he let out a sigh of his own. Although he hid it better from the two of them, Minato was definitely the more protective of the two. Yet he was smart enough to know a losing battle when he saw one, and he knew it would be better to train Naruto properly than to allow her to continue learning as she had. With no instruction and no idea of the consequences of her actions. While the dangers of performing the Kage Bunshin had been made moot due to her already larger than normal chakra reserves, the next time she decided to try something on her own they might not be so lucky. As surprised as they were by the display, Tsukumo said, "You've got an amazing little girl there." "Yeah, we do," Kushina agreed fondly. His gaze drifted back over to Naruto, who after finishing her dance made a point of ignoring her father. instead happily making her way to the silver-haired boy who was silently observing them all with a critical eye and simply held her arms out to him. With a look of amusement that she no doubt mirrored, he watched fondly as Kakashi handed Gama-chan back to her. I know I don't have to tell you this, but just make sure that she is okay. His words served the purpose of reminding her they had much more to worry about than Naruto's uncanny ability to pick up jutsus just by seeing them performed a couple of times. Kushina frowned. Underneath all the worry there existed an underlying sense of guilt. Even if she herself had little choice in the matter, it was a burden she never would have wished for any child to carry, least of all her own. We won't let anything happen to her, Kushina vowed, meaning every world. Once Minato relieved Kakashi from his duty as Naruto's bag carrier, the couple bid them both a fond farewell before making their way home. With their baby daughter safely wrapped in her arms, Kushina was determined to make sure their daughter never had a reason to lose her smile. XXX. Much to their daughter's annoyance, the moment they got home she was made to stay still while both Kushina and Minato checked her seal. By the time she started wriggling impatiently, they were able to determine there was absolutely nothing wrong with it. In fact, it was functioning exactly as it should. Despite herself, Kushina couldn't help but wish they did find something wrong. At least then there would be something for them to fix. As it was, there was nothing for them to do. Nothing but speak to Naruto and somehow get her to understand why there was a giant fox within her, why she shouldn't listen to it, and why she certainly shouldn't trust a word it says. Just the thought of their little girl being subjected to the hatred of the beast, of all the lies it must be filling her head with, made Kushina want to break something. Kushina, are you okay? Minato asked, the concern in his voice palpable as he entered their room with a yawning Naruto in his arms. After checking her seal, they decided to see what else she might have learnt. When showing her the hand seals to a few basic jutsus only yielded curious yet completely clueless looks, and attempts to teach how to perform them produced not even a puff of smoke. They both were left more than a little baffled. After all, if she was able to grasp an A-rank jutsu with little to no instruction, it would stand to reason the E ranks taught at the academy should be mere child's play for her. They were quick to discover it was anything but. Yet in spite of her numerous failed attempts and the assurances from the both of them that she did not need to learn such things right now, Naruto stubbornly continued trying to perform the henge. By the time night descended and her bedtime drew near, it took their combined efforts just to get her to stop so that they could give her a bath and get her ready for bed. I'm okay, she assured him before picking up Naruto's nightcap and placing the ridiculous thing atop her mess of blonde spikes. That done, she carefully took her out of her husband's arms before placing her down onto the middle of their bed, neither of them willing to let her out of their sight. At least for the night. As they got in beside her, she shared a long look with Minato before returning her gaze back to their exhausted daughter. Naruto-chan, your daddy and I have something we must discuss with you, she began seriously, the soberness of her tone causing a frown to appear on Naruto's face. We wanted to talk to you about your dreams, Naruto-chan, Minato said. Bad, Naruto murmured with a noticeable tremble in her voice that made both their hearts ache. I know, darling, Kushina tried to console as she reached down to gently stroke a scarred cheek comfortingly. I'm sorry we weren't here for you, but we need to know what you see in your dreams, Naruto-chan. Looking between them, she seemed to hesitate for a moment before looking down at her own hands and refusing to meet their gazes. Naruto alone. No mommy, daddy, she answered, unusually subdued. No, like Naruto. I don't want Naruto. Even though Tsukumo had already told them to see, their cheerful little girl sounded so solemn and unlike herself was absolutely heartbreaking. It's just a dream. It's not real, Minato assured her as he took her hand in his. We are here, Naruto-chan, Kushina added, just needing her to know that as she gently took Naruto's other hand in hers. And we are not going anywhere. Not if we could help it. For a moment there was nothing but silence as she continued to stare down at her hands, the hands that were currently engulfed in each of theirs. When she finally looked up, it was to give them a small but true smile, the sight of which immediately eased the ache in her chest. No matter what you may hear, no matter what anybody may say, we love you, Naruto. We love you so much. Don't ever doubt that. No doubt, hearing the plea in her tone and knowing she was referring to more than just the dream Naruto had described to them, Minato gave her a soft look. Naruto-chan, can you tell me if you saw anything else in your dreams? Anything strange? He questioned. When all he got was a confused frown in response, he hesitated for a moment before taking a deep breath and asking, "This may sound strange, Naruto-chan, but have you seen anything like a fox in your dreams?" "No," Naruto replied with a shake of the head and a thoughtful frown. At that they shared a look. While their daughter was growing up fast, she was still at the stage where she didn't know how to lie. At her age it was just not something that ever occurred to her. As relieved as they were to know the fox was not a factor, the only possibility was that someone was saying things in front of their daughter that they shouldn't. She didn't know who was responsible, but when they got to the bottom of this, there was going to be hell to pay. "Can you promise us something, sweetie?" Kushina implored. "Yes, mommy," was her eager reply. "Can you promise you will tell us if you do?" Satisfied with the nod they received in reply, Kushina gave her a gentle kiss to the forehead before drawing away to watch as her husband did the same. Making certain to assure her once more that they would always be there for her, as they lay down on either side of her that night, their hands remained firmly entangled in hers. Though they knew tomorrow night they would have to return her to her room, tonight they needed her with them just as much as she needed them. XXX. For the first time since he stupidly allowed himself to be caged once again, Kurama found his interest perked by the new developments. At the thought of Naruto being considered a prodigy by anyone, he couldn't help but snort. The fact she could already mold her chakra was not surprising to him. As chakra was essentially the manifestation of mixing a person's physical and spiritual energy, it only stood to reason that the moment the brat built up enough physical energy, she would be able to put it to good use. After all, even if she could not yet understand it all, there were some things that were so ingrained, so instinctive that all it needed was the smallest of triggers to manifest. For the Naruto that existed before the cage Bunshin was something that had become second nature to the boy, to the point he could perform it without even having to use all the signs or say the words. At only a few weeks shy of 2 years old, the Naruto of this time was already reaping the benefits of the hard work and experience of her former self. This pleased him greatly. With the cage Bunshin in her arsenal, her potential to grow was unparalleled. With a sigh, Kurama glared at the leaky sewer that was to be his prison for the next few years and was just about to go back to sleep when a tiny form clutching an orange toad made its way towards his cage. As the figure approached, he found himself straightening up, completely alert as he peered down at the familiar head of blonde spikes with a speculative eye. In spite of the changes, the brat didn't look much different to her male counterpart at the same age. Eyes wide, she stopped in front of his cage and stared up at him. "How did you find your way here, brat?" he asked, the natural growl to his voice making the question come out a lot harsher than intended. "Daddy say, dear fox. I look," the little girl replied simply, a proud smile curving her lips as she met his gaze head on. At those words, Kurama stared down at her with narrowed eyes, trying his hardest to work out what she knew. Needing to know, he leaned over her with his teeth bared in a grin as he demanded, "Do you have any idea who I am, brat? Do you have any idea what you have stumbled upon?" Far from cowed, she merely blinked at him before breaking into a grin of her own. In response, she said, "Nope." In spite of himself, Kurama couldn't help the stab of disappointment that immediately came over him at the answer. "Only known Gwen," she finished with a squeal of delight as she held her hand out to him in a closed fist. There weren't very many things that could surprise him, the number of those who have managed such a feat even fewer. Yet as he stared down the smiling blonde that stood before him, Kurama could not dispute that Naruto had managed to get the better of him on more than one occasion. It seemed that Naruto was no different. With a wide grin he reached down to tap her outstretched fist with his own and said, "Tch. You stupid brat." As if to prove him right, she slipped past the bars holding him at bay and without the slightest hint of fear began to rearrange the mass of red-orange fur connected to one of his resting tails so that she could wrap it around her small body. Once she was comfortable enough, she laid her head down and with a sigh snuggled against him. The most powerful of all the tailed beast, the mighty Kyuubi. "What the hell do you think you are doing, brat? Shish, sleep," the brat had the gall to scold him. Even though all he had to do was wave his tail to be rid of her, Kurama remained still even as he growled, "Not on me you don't." Lips quivering, the stupid brat turned to him with tear-filled eyes and sniffed, "But bad dear. Here FWEN safe." As she pinned him with her big blue eyes, widening them to an impossibly large size as they gleamed with tears in the dim light, Kurama was forced to break away from her gaze with a snort of disgust. But rather than brush the brat away, he folded his paws and lowering his body laid his head down.